Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was walking home from work one evening in late spring. It had been a long, hectic day, and just as I left the office building, the sky opened up into this sudden, heavy downpour. Nothing like the drizzle we'd been dealing with earlier in the week. The kind where you get soaked in seconds if you're not prepared. I had no umbrella with me, so I just pulled my jacket tighter and started moving faster down the sidewalk. The streets were slick, and the rain was loud, hammering the pavement and bouncing off car roofs. Most people were hurrying past, heads down, collars up, trying to escape the wet as quickly as possible. I was doing the same, halfway wishing I'd left my umbrella in my car instead of in the office. About halfway through the walk, near a little corner store with a flickering neon sign, I noticed a man standing on the sidewalk, just under a street lamp. He was dressed in a dark suit, looking out of place with no coat or umbrella at all. What caught my attention was how dry he was. From what I could tell, he wasn't even damp. Not a single drop on his jacket or hair. The rain was falling hard around him, splashing on the ground and on me as I passed by, but he didn't seem affected. I slowed down as I got closer, more out of curiosity than anything else. The man looked straight at me, eyebrows raised, like he was trying to figure something out. Then he spoke, his voice calm, but with this faint edge of confusion. He asked, "Is this normal?" I blinked, a little caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "The rain," he said, glancing up at the sky as if seeing it properly for the first time. "Is this normal? This weather?" I looked up too. The clouds were thick and low, the rain still coming down hard, and I couldn't tell if he was being serious or messing with me. "Yeah, I guess. Spring storms happen around here." He nodded slowly, almost like he was processing the idea. "It's strange. Where I come from, this doesn't happen." The tone of his voice wasn't quite right, like he was picking words carefully. Or maybe he didn't have the full grasp of how to talk about things we all understood. He seemed harmless, but there was something off. Something about the way he looked at me, like he was studying me the way a scientist would a new specimen. I shrugged, not sure how to respond. "Well, it's just rain. Happens every year." He smiled faintly, but it was one of those smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes. I kept walking, figuring it was some weird guy maybe messing with strangers or just lost. That's when the weirdness really started. I passed a few other people on the street, all rushing by with umbrellas or jackets. Nobody seemed to notice the man in the suit at all, even though he was standing right in the middle of the sidewalk. I glanced back once and saw him still there, just standing, perfectly dry. No one bumped into him, no one even glanced his way. The street lamp flickered, the yellow light blinking erratically for a moment, and then it was steady again. I started feeling like I was being watched. Not by the man, he wasn't moving, just standing there, but by something else, something unseen. I quickened my pace, but the street seemed longer than it should have been. The usual sounds of the city, the distant honks, people talking, footsteps, felt muted, like I was underwater. Even the rain, which moments ago had been so loud, was somehow quieter. I stopped for a second, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The man in the suit was gone. I looked up and down the block. Nothing. No trace of him. The street was empty except for me and the rain. I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. Maybe I was just tired and stressed and my mind was playing tricks. But then, as I turned to keep walking, I noticed something strange on the sidewalk. A small, wet imprint. It looked like a footprint, but unlike any human shoe. It was perfectly oval, no tread, no pattern. Just a smooth, damp mark pressed into the concrete. I bent down and touched it with my finger. It was wet, cold from the rain, but the shape was weird, like it didn't quite belong. That's when I realized I'd lost track of time. The sun had almost set, and the rain was starting to let up. The street lights were flickering on one by one. I kept walking, but every time I glanced back over my shoulder, I thought I saw a shadow slipping between the buildings, just at the edge of my vision. But whenever I looked directly, nothing was there. When I finally got home, I locked the door behind me and sat down, still feeling uneasy. I checked my phone for the time. It showed I'd been walking for nearly twice as long as usual, at least 45 minutes. But the distance from my office to my place normally took 20. I couldn't explain that either. The footprint was still on my mind, and the man's voice echoing in my head asking, "Is this normal?" I've walked that route a few times since, during both dry days and rainstorms, but I haven't seen him again. No strange footprints either. Still, sometimes when I hear heavy rain at night, I wonder if I'm being watched or if that man is out there somewhere waiting to ask the same question again. I was out for my usual evening jog through my neighborhood, just a quiet cul-de-sac in the suburbs of Portland. It was one of those clear, cool autumn nights, the kind where the air smells a bit like wet leaves and wood smoke from nearby chimneys. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, so the streetlights were flickering on one by one, casting long shadows across the pavement. I wasn't in any rush, just doing my thing, trying to keep a steady pace. I prefer jogging around this part of town because it's peaceful, not much traffic, and the houses are spaced out with big trees that make it feel almost like a park. There's something calming about it. About halfway through my usual route, as I rounded the corner near the end of Cedar Lane, I noticed a man running toward me. I caught my breath for a second because it was kind of late, and nobody really runs that time around here. But what really stopped me was how perfectly he matched my pace. Like, literally step for step, stride for stride, as if he was some reflection or shadow keeping perfect time. He looked normal enough, mid-30s, average build, plain dark running clothes, nothing flashy or out of place. His face was kind of blurry in the dim light, but I could see his jawline was sharp and his hair was slicked back. Nothing weird there. But there was something about him that didn't feel right, though I couldn't put my finger on it. I kept glancing over as we passed each other, but he didn't say anything. Just kept running without breaking stride, like he was studying me or something. It felt deliberate, like he was matching me for a reason. I slowed down a little, thinking maybe I'd let him pass, but he didn't. He kept running toward me, still perfectly pacing with my slower steps. I tried to speed up, and so did he, exactly the same. It was almost like we were connected by some invisible rhythm. Then I stopped, right there on the sidewalk. Just stopped dead, catching my breath, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. I looked at him, half expecting him to stop too, but he didn't. He kept going, keeping that same rhythm, just running past me. What creeped me out was that as he moved past, he didn't make a sound. No footsteps on the pavement, no rustle of clothes, just nothing, like he was gliding or floating or something. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of a car far away, but right there it was silent. I blinked and he was already halfway down the block. Then I blinked again and he was gone. Just gone. No sign of him anywhere. No shadow stretching behind him. No disappearing into a driveway or behind a tree. Nothing. Just gone. I stood there for a minute, staring down the street, but there was no sign he'd ever been there at all. I tried to shake it off and started jogging again, but my mind kept wandering back to that guy. The way he matched me step for step like a mirror. The silence when he passed, the way he just vanished into nothing. When I got back home, I told my wife, Sarah, what happened. She gave me the usual, "you're imagining things" look, which I get. I mean, it sounds crazy when you say it out loud. The next day at work, I kept thinking about it. I looked for anything strange on the neighborhood security cameras. There's one at the corner, but the footage just showed me jogging alone, nothing else. That night, I went out for another run, hoping to see him again, or at least figure something out. No sign of him. But I did notice other weird things. For starters, my smartwatch, which I always wear to track distance and heart rate, was acting up. It kept freezing or showing the wrong time. I reset it twice, but it still jumped ahead randomly by a few minutes. I figured maybe the cold weather was messing with it. Also, my dog Scout, who usually sleeps through everything, kept whining at the window near the front door. I couldn't see anything outside, but Scout was fixated, ears perked and tail stiff. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I was reading too much into things, but a nagging feeling stuck with me. On my next run, I tried to stay alert for anything unusual. The neighborhood was quieter than usual, almost too quiet. No cars, no kids playing, no distant music or TV sounds. When I passed the spot near Cedar Lane again, I heard a faint noise, a kind of low humming. It was soft, almost like a drone, but when I stopped and listened closely, it vanished. I looked around, but the street was empty. The trees swayed gently in the wind, leaves brushing softly against each other. That's when I noticed something else. Small patches of light flickering in the distance between the houses, almost like the windows were glowing with some weird bluish tint. But when I blinked and looked again, the lights were gone. I felt my skin prickling. I turned around fast, but the street behind me was empty. No one. I started jogging home faster, the hairs on my neck standing up. When I got inside, Sarah was already asleep. I sat on the couch for a while, trying to calm down. My heart was racing, and the silence in the house felt heavy. The next few nights, I kept running the same route, hoping the guy would show up again. Maybe to explain, or at least to confirm what I'd seen, but he never did. Instead, I noticed more strange things. On one run, I swear I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving just beyond the trees, watching me. When I stopped and called out, nothing answered. Another time, I found footprints on the sidewalk, barely there, like someone was running on their toes, almost gliding. But when I checked carefully, they weren't human. The toes were longer, narrower, like claws, but there was no sign of a person. I didn't tell anyone. Who'd believe me? The last time I saw the man was about a week after the first encounter. I was near the park at dusk. The sky was a dull orange, the air thick with the smell of rain. I spotted him again, standing still on the sidewalk ahead, waiting. This time, he didn't run. I slowed and approached cautiously. He looked up and our eyes met for a long moment. His face was clearer now, pale, almost too smooth, with eyes that seemed empty, like there was no soul behind them. I asked him, "Who are you? Why are you following me?" He didn't say anything. Instead, he smiled, a thin, slow smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing down a side street. I never saw him again. Since then, I've been trying to piece it all together. The perfect pace, the silence, the way he vanished, the strange lights, the weird footprints. Nothing adds up. Some nights I still run that route, half hoping to find answers, but it's just me, the empty street, and the quiet shadows that never quite feel like they're alone. The day started like any other Wednesday at the small hardware store where I work. It's not a big place, just one floor with aisles packed with tools, paint, garden stuff. The usual. I've been there for almost 3 years, and I know the regulars, the routines, and most of the inventory by heart. My coworker Dan was supposed to open with me, but he called in sick that morning. No big deal. Management said they'd send someone to cover. Around 8:30, just after we unlocked the doors, a guy showed up. He looked kind of out of place, dressed in a plain black jacket, dark jeans, and boots that were too clean for a hardware store. He didn't introduce himself right away, just nodded at me and started pulling a name tag from his pocket, except he never clipped it on. I glanced at the clock, then back at him. "Hey, you must be the replacement, right? I'm Mark." He nodded again. "Yeah, I'm here for Dan's shift." That was about the extent of it. Right off the bat, something felt off. He didn't smile or make small talk. When customers came in, he helped them quickly and quietly, but barely said more than a few words. I caught him glancing around a lot, like he was watching but not really seeing. What got me was how he handled the work. Like, he knew everything perfectly. When a customer asked for a part or advice, he answered exactly like Dan would, but better, like he was running a mental cheat sheet. It wasn't just the store stuff either. When I asked about some of my personal projects, the deck I was building in my backyard or the new lawnmower I'd been eyeing, he knew about them, like how long I'd been working on the deck, the brand of mower I preferred, even that I was thinking about switching to organic fertilizers because my daughter's allergies had gotten worse. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe Dan had mentioned all this stuff in passing, but it didn't add up. I hadn't talked to Dan in weeks, and I hadn't told anyone else half of that stuff. "Where did you learn all that?" I finally asked when we had a quiet moment near the paint aisle. The guy shifted, looked at me, or maybe through me, because his eyes felt empty, like they weren't quite human. "I've been trained," he said, voice low and flat. "Trained by who?" He didn't answer. just turned away and started organizing boxes on a shelf. After a while, I tried to get him to talk more about himself, where he was from, what he did before, if he had any hobbies, but he always dodged the questions. When I asked for ID, or at least a work badge, he just gave me this tight smile and said, "I don't carry that." Um, that made me uneasy. Our store had rules. Everyone had to wear a badge for security, but no manager seemed to mind. The guy was just there, moving like a shadow. Around lunchtime, I stepped outside for a smoke break, and when I came back, he was standing just inside the front door, watching the parking lot. I caught his eyes on me for a second, but when I looked back, he turned away like nothing happened. The whole day, I kept noticing odd things. The way he never blinked much, how his skin seemed too smooth, like plastic but not shiny. When he moved around, it was too precise, like a robot but somehow natural. And that voice, it was low but somehow hollow, like someone trying to imitate a human without fully getting it right. When a kid ran by, knocking over a stack of boxes, the guy didn't react the way anyone else would. No surprise, no urgency, just watched and then bent down to help without a word. By mid-afternoon, I was on edge. The other employees came and went, some giving the replacement a curious glance, but no one talked to him much. When I tried to bring it up to the manager, she just shrugged and said, "He's filling in. That's all." Toward closing time, a regular customer came in. Old Mr. Harper, the guy who owns the hardware store across town. He's friendly and chatty, always has stories about the old days or fishing trips. Mr. Harper walked right up to the replacement and started asking about a rare tool, something not even in the store's inventory. I expected the guy to say he didn't know, but instead, he started listing specs, alternative brands, prices, and even where Mr. Harper could find one in the next town over. I was stunned. I didn't know anyone who could answer that stuff off the top of their head. Mr. Harper's eyes went wide, like he'd seen a ghost, and then he muttered something and left without buying anything. After that, the guy just went to the back room and closed the door for the last hour. I was alone at the counter, cleaning up when I noticed my phone buzzing in my pocket. It was a text from Dan. "You're sure that's the replacement? Doesn't sound like me." I didn't answer. I kept watching the back room door, half expecting him to come out, but the store was quiet. When closing time came, I locked up and went outside. The parking lot was empty except for one car, the replacement's. As I walked past, I thought I saw him standing just inside the tinted windows, watching me with those empty eyes. I shook my head and got in my car. Driving home, I kept thinking about how much that guy knew. About me, the store, even people I hadn't mentioned in years, and how he never gave me a real answer about himself. Like he was a ghost wearing a mask. I told a couple of friends later, but they laughed it off, said I was tired or maybe overthinking. Maybe I was. But the weird part is, the next day Dan showed up at work like nothing happened, acting totally normal. I asked him if anyone had come in to cover, but he looked confused. No, I called in sick, but I never heard about anyone else. I didn't say anything. That replacement never existed in any official record. No manager mentioned him, and no one else at the store seemed to remember him either. I checked the security cameras. The footage was corrupted during the hours he was supposed to be there. I still don't know who or what he was, but I know I never want to see him again. I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood on the edge of Portland, Oregon. It's mostly families and retirees. Nothing flashy, just regular houses, lawns, and the occasional barking dog. I've been here about 4 years now, and honestly, it's the kind of place where you barely notice your neighbors unless you're actually chatting with them on the sidewalk or borrowing a cup of sugar. There's one house 2 doors down from mine that used to belong to a guy named Martin. He was kind of a fixture around here, not super friendly, but always polite. We'd exchange nods or brief hellos whenever we crossed paths. Martin moved out around late fall last year, said he was relocating for work or something. No big deal. After he left, the house sat empty. I'd see mail pile up sometimes, but no sign of anyone living there. Then, about 2 months ago, I was walking the dog one evening just after sunset. The sky was that dull gray you get in early spring here, and the streetlights were flickering on. I noticed a figure standing in Martin's driveway, fiddling with the mailbox. At first I thought, that's weird, Someone moved in already? But then I realized it was Martin. He looked the same as I remembered, except maybe a little paler. He saw me and waved. "Hey," he said, smiling like nothing had changed. "Martin? I thought you moved out months ago?" I asked, stopping a few feet from him. He blinked, confused, then laughed it off. "No, I've been here the whole time. Must be some mix-up." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure? The house was empty all winter. I even picked up some of your mail a few times." He frowned and looked down the street, like trying to figure out what I was talking about. "That can't be right." "I've been around. Maybe you're thinking of someone else." That was the first weird moment. I shrugged it off and invited him to come over for coffee the next day. Maybe he was just messing with me. When I got to his place the following afternoon, the house looked lived in, but not in the way I'd expect. It was clean, but kind of sterile. No personal touches, no signs of the usual clutter or knickknacks you find in people's homes. It was like a set for a TV show about a house, all neat and artificial. Martin greeted me at the door, but something felt off. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and his movements were a little too precise, like he was consciously trying to mimic normal behavior. We sat in the living room, and I tried to make small talk. "So how have you been?" I asked. "Good," he replied. "Working mostly, not much else." I mentioned the mail and the empty house again, but he acted like it was nonsense. "I don't know where you got that idea." I asked if he remembered leaving, maybe going away for a bit. He stared at me, genuinely puzzled, and said, "I haven't left. I'm not sure why you'd think that." The whole conversation felt like talking to someone who didn't quite understand the situation, or maybe someone who was hiding something but wasn't very good at it. Over the next few days, I kept running into him, walking his dog that I hadn't seen before, doing yard work, even sitting on his porch reading a book. But every time I tried to bring up his absence, or the fact that neighbors remembered the house being empty, he'd either change the subject or look genuinely baffled. One afternoon, I was at the grocery store and saw a couple of other neighbors talking near the entrance. I asked them if they'd seen Martin lately. "Martin? He hasn't lived here for months," one of them said. "I don't know what you're talking about." I was dumbfounded. I told them I'd seen him almost every day. They just shook their heads. That's when I realized something wasn't right. One evening, I decided to visit Martin's house again, hoping to clear things up. When I knocked, he opened the door quickly, like he'd been expecting me. "Hey," he said, but his voice was quieter, more controlled. "Look, Martin," I said, "neighbors say you moved months ago. You've been here, but everyone else says the house was empty." He hesitated, then smiled. "I'm not sure why they'd say that. I've been here." His eyes didn't quite focus on me. They flicked past me sometimes, like he wasn't fully there. I asked him if he wanted to go for a walk. He agreed, and we walked around the block. As we walked, I noticed his speech was a bit off. He paused oddly in sentences, sometimes repeating words. He avoided certain topics and seemed uncomfortable with questions about the neighborhood or old events. At one point, he looked at a tree and asked, "What kind of tree is that?" "A maple," I said. He nodded slowly, like he was processing something new. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the Martin I knew. But he looked human enough, sounded human enough. I started paying closer attention. Once, while he was outside raking leaves, I noticed his shadow didn't quite match his movements. It lagged behind a bit, almost like it was out of sync. Another time, I caught him staring at a wall inside his house, not blinking for what felt like an unusually long time. I tried to get him to talk about his work or hobbies. He gave vague answers or said things that didn't add up. One afternoon, I found a picture of a younger Martin in a frame on his mantle. He looked normal in the photo, smiling, relaxed, but the photo itself felt strange, like the colors were slightly off, washed out. I took a closer look and saw the same weird symbol I'd seen scratched on the book at the library last year, a triangle with 3 dots inside it, barely noticeable in the corner of the picture. I asked him about it, and he just smiled awkwardly. Must be from the frame. But the frame looked new. The strangest moment came late one night when I was returning from the store. I saw Martin standing on his porch, but something was wrong. His movements were jerky, unnatural, almost like a bad video playback. I called out, but he didn't respond. Then he suddenly turned toward me, face blank, and said, "I'm right here." The way he said it didn't sound human at all. It was flat, like a recording. I blinked, and he was normal again, smiling faintly. I backed away and walked home quickly. In the following days, I kept trying to figure out what was going on, but Martin never gave me a straight answer. Eventually, I stopped pushing. He stayed in the neighborhood, acting like nothing was wrong, never acknowledging anyone's concerns about his absence or strange behavior. Sometimes, when I'm outside at night, I think I see him standing in the shadows, watching. But if I approach, he's gone. I still don't know what he really is or what he wants, just a man who never left, but somehow never really belonged. My phone rang at exactly 3:33 a.m. I don't know why the time sticks in my head so clearly. Maybe because I don't usually get calls in the middle of the night, and this one was weird from the start. I was half asleep, fumbling on the bedside table for the phone. The screen lit up, no caller ID. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A calm voice replied. Not unfamiliar, but not someone I could place either. Quiet, smooth, steady. "Do you remember who you really are?" I sat up straight, heart pounding. "Who is this?" No answer. Just the same calm voice again, repeating, "Do you remember who you really are?" The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long minute, tried calling back, but the number was blocked. That was the start of it. I'm Ethan. I live in a small house just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. The kind of place where the desert meets the forest and the night sky is so clear you can see every star. I'm a software engineer by day, pretty average life. No one weird, no enemies, no secret past. At least that's what I thought. After that call, I couldn't sleep. The questions spun in my head. Who do I really am? I kept thinking about my childhood, my parents, everything I knew about myself. Nothing felt off, but still, something about that voice felt like it knew more than I did. The next few days were strange. I kept getting phone calls, always at odd hours, always the same voice, always just the one question. "Do you remember who you really are?" No answers, no explanations. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe this? Instead, I started watching myself, paying attention to small details. I noticed weird gaps in my memory. Not the usual forgetfulness, but moments that felt like missing clips in a movie. One afternoon, I went hiking alone up near Kendrick Peak. The weather was cool, a little windy. I usually love that trail, but that day, something felt off. I swear I heard footsteps behind me, but every time I turned, no one was there. The shadows among the trees seemed wrong, like they stretched too far or didn't match the shapes that cast them. I kept thinking about that voice, like it was watching me. It was starting to feel less like a prank call and more like something else. Back home, I checked my phone logs. The calls weren't coming from normal networks, some weird scrambling in the data. I even thought about calling the cops, but there was no threat, just that question, repeated. One night, a week after the first call, I was lying in bed, eyes closed, when the phone buzzed again. I didn't answer. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, trying to push the voice out of my head. Suddenly, I noticed something outside my window. A figure standing just beyond the porch light. Tall, slender, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over their face. I didn't recognize the person. When I blinked, they were gone. I told myself it was probably a neighbor or a jogger, but the feeling didn't go away. It was like they were waiting, watching, but not quite human. That same week at work, things got weirder. I'd sit at my desk and for a second, I'd lose track of what I was doing. My coworkers would say I zoned out or looked distracted, but I couldn't explain it. My computer screen would flicker oddly, like static for a moment, and when I'd blink, everything was normal again. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office. "Ethan, you okay? You've been off lately." I lied, said I was fine, just tired. On the drive home, the sun was setting, casting long orange shadows over the highway. I passed a pickup truck parked by the side of the road. The driver's door was open, but no one was inside. I slowed down and looked back as I passed. For a moment, I thought I saw the same figure from my porch standing in the field nearby. I shook my head, trying to clear it. At home, I started keeping a journal, writing down every odd thing I noticed. The calls, the figure, the glitches in my memory. One night, about 2 weeks after the first call, I got a knock on the door around 1 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole. No one there. I opened the door slowly. No one. just a small folded piece of paper on the doorstep. I picked it up. Written in neat handwriting were the words, "Do you remember who you really are?" I dropped the paper and shut the door, my hands shaking. I called my best friend Mark the next morning, told him everything. He didn't believe me at first, thought I was stressed or maybe losing it. But then I told him about the paper and the figure outside. "Okay, that's weird," he said. "You want me to come over?" He did, and we stayed up all night going through my phone records, the paper, even checking the security footage from my doorbell camera. But the footage showed nothing unusual, no figure, no footsteps. The calls kept coming every few days, always the same voice, always the same question. The paper appeared twice more, each time left in a different place. My mailbox, my car dashboard. One day I started seeing the figure during the day, just at the edge of my vision. When I tried to look directly, they vanished. The way they moved didn't quite feel human. Smooth, deliberate, like someone imitating the way people walk, but not quite getting it right. I stopped going on hikes alone, started locking all my doors and windows, but the calls never stopped. Then, about a month after the first call, something different happened. I was home alone, sitting at the kitchen table when the phone rang again. This time, I answered immediately. "Do you remember who you really are?" the voice asked. Before I could respond, a soft buzzing filled the room. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped. I rubbed my arms. Then the voice said something new, almost like a whisper. "You're closer than you think." The line went dead. I sat there, heart racing. After that night, the calls stopped. The figure outside never came back. But I still feel it sometimes, like I'm being watched or followed. And the missing pieces in my memory, they're still there. Every now and then I find myself wondering if maybe I'm not the person I think I am at all. I started noticing him about 2 weeks after I moved into my new place in a quiet neighborhood in Tacoma, Washington. It was late October, and the days were getting shorter, with a steady drizzle that made everything feel damp and gray. I was still settling in, unpacking boxes, trying to get used to the new job and the unfamiliar streets. The street corner where I saw him wasn't anything special, just the intersection of 9th and Alder. Two fairly normal streets lined with old houses, some small businesses, nothing that would draw a crowd or tourists. Yet every day, almost like clockwork, I'd see the same guy standing there, camera in hand, taking pictures of the exact same spot. It was always between 4:15 and 4:20 in the afternoon. I'd be driving home or sometimes walking my dog, and there he'd be, crouched down or adjusting his lens, snapping photos of the cracked pavement, the street sign, the faded crosswalk lines. It was the kind of thing you'd only notice if you were paying attention, but I found it odd. Nobody else seemed to pay him any mind. At first, I just assumed he was some kind of hobbyist photographer or maybe working on a project. But after about a week of seeing him there every single day, I started wondering if there was something else going on. One day I decided to stop and talk to him. It was a Tuesday afternoon, cloudy and cold, with a steady drizzle. I parked my car a little down the street and walked over, dog on a leash. He was there, as usual, with his camera pointed at the street corner. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't jump or seem startled, just looked up slowly, like he wasn't expecting anyone but wasn't displeased either. "Hi," he replied, his voice calm and low. "I see you here a lot, taking pictures of this corner every day?" He nodded, keeping his eyes on the camera in his hands. "Yes. It's important to document." "Yeah? What makes this corner so special?" He paused for a moment, then said, "I don't know why anyone else would find it interesting. It's just a corner." His answer caught me off guard. "Wait, you don't live around here? You're not from the neighborhood?" He shook his head slowly. "No. I don't usually come this way. I don't know many people in this area." I frowned. "But you're here every day, same time. Doesn't that seem odd to you?" He blinked, then smiled faintly. "I suppose. I don't usually think about it that way." There was something off about him, though I couldn't say exactly what. His mannerisms were just a little too precise, a little too careful. When he talked, it was like he was choosing his words with extreme care, almost as if testing them for the right fit. I asked him his name. "Simon," he said. I told him mine and offered a handshake. He shook it, but his grip was cool. almost mechanical. We talked for a few minutes more. I asked why he was so focused on that empty street corner. "It's important to record places where little happens," he said. "Sometimes the most ordinary spots hold the most significance." That sounded like a line from some art project, but I didn't press it. Something about Simon made me uneasy, though I couldn't put my finger on why. Over the next week, I kept an eye out for him. Sometimes I'd pass by the corner at exactly the right time, and he'd be there, camera ready. But I started noticing strange things. For one, he never seemed to have a phone or any other equipment. Just the camera. No bag, no notes. He never talked to anyone else, and no one ever seemed to acknowledge him. At work, I mentioned the guy to a few coworkers who lived nearby. They looked at me like I was joking. "There's nobody like that around here," one said. "Especially not hanging out on 9th and Alder every day. That's a dead corner." I shrugged it off at the time, but it planted a seed of doubt. One late afternoon, I took a different route home and stopped near the corner again. Simon was there, crouched by the curb, snapping photos. I walked up and said, "Hey Simon, do you know how rare it is for people to even walk down this street?" He looked up at me with genuine confusion. "People walk here?" "Yeah, all the time. I do. And a lot of my neighbors too." He blinked slowly, then said, "I wasn't aware." That didn't make sense. I told him about the neighborhood potlucks, the kids playing down the street, how the local bakery always had a line in the morning. He listened, but looked more puzzled with each word. "I've never seen any of that," he said softly. At that moment, I realized I didn't really know where Simon came from. He wasn't on the neighborhood Facebook page. No one had seen him before I did. I asked him directly, "Simon, where do you live?" He hesitated. "Not far, but I don't stay in one place for long." I pressed again. "Were you here before you started taking these photos?" He gave me a blank look. "I don't know what you mean." That's when I started to feel genuinely unsettled. I had this creeping sense that Simon wasn't lying exactly, but there was something about him that didn't fit. A few days later, I tried to follow him after he finished taking photos. He walked slowly down the street, but after a block or so, he disappeared into a narrow alley between two houses. I waited 5 minutes, no sign of him coming out. When I peeked in, the alley was empty. I checked the houses around, but no door was open, no sign anyone had gone inside. I drove home and checked the security camera footage I had installed a few weeks before moving in. I went through the footage from that afternoon. Simon appeared at the corner at 4:17, camera out, snapping photos. Then he turned and walked down the street. The footage showed him entering the alley, but after that, the camera picked up nothing. No Simon walking out, no shadows, no movement at all. I rewound and watched again. I even sped it up and slowed it down. Nothing. I checked every alleyway and street nearby the next day. No sign of Simon. I tried calling the number I'd gotten when I texted him once. No answer. The number didn't exist. I started talking to other neighbors again, describing Simon. Some remembered seeing him, others didn't. One elderly woman said she thought I was imagining things. I stopped seeing him at the corner for a few days. Then, one evening, around dusk, I caught a glimpse of him standing across the street from my house. He wasn't taking pictures, just standing, staring up at my window. I blinked, and he was gone. After that, I didn't see Simon for weeks. Then, one night, I was getting ready for bed around 11:30 p.m. when I heard a soft tapping at my front window. I looked over. There he was, standing just outside, looking in. I didn't open the window or the door. He didn't say anything, just gave a small nod, turned, and walked away down the street. The next day, I asked around again. No one had seen him. No one remembered a man like that. Weeks passed. The corner stayed empty. I never saw Simon again. But sometimes when I'm walking my dog around sunset, I catch a shadow out of the corner of my eye, just standing still at the edge of the street, watching. And I wonder who he really was and why he was so interested in a corner where nothing happens. I work at the public library in a small college town in Vermont. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, and the pace is slow, especially during the late afternoon when classes are over, but most people haven't come home yet. I've been the assistant librarian here for about 3 years now, and my main job is helping people find research materials, mostly related to environmental science and forestry. That's my field, studied it in school, still pretty passionate about it. It started a few months ago. One afternoon, just before closing, I noticed a man sitting in the back corner of the reading room. It was unusual because that corner is mostly empty, and it faces away from the main floor. I don't remember seeing him before. He wore a simple dark jacket and jeans, and his hair was neatly combed, but his posture was stiff, almost unnatural. He had a notebook and a pen, but no laptop or phone. What caught my attention first was the books stacked quietly on the table in front of him. They were all on very specific topics: botany, old forestry techniques, plant ecology. Basically, exactly the kind of books I spend most of my time helping students find. But there was something odd. None of the books had due dates stamped on them. In fact, none of them looked checked out at all. I thought maybe he was just reading them here. I've seen that before, but the way he behaved was strange. Whenever I glanced over, he was looking down at the table, never at the books. When I turned back to the computer or helped someone else, he'd quietly reach for one, flip a page, then set it back down immediately. No notes, no bookmarks, nothing. He never made eye contact with anyone. Even when the library got quieter and the few other patrons left, he just sat there facing the wall, almost like he was hiding. I tried to catch his attention once. "Hey, do you need help finding anything?" I asked, walking over casually. He didn't respond, just kept scribbling something in his notebook, but the handwriting was neat and methodical. Numbers, letters, some sort of charts maybe. I tried again a few minutes later, but he just looked down and didn't say a word. I figured he was just shy or maybe didn't want to talk. No big deal. But then the weirdness started piling up. Over the next couple of weeks, he showed up almost every day around the same time. Always the same spot. Always the same pile of books on my field of study. And every time the books stayed on the table, never taken out or checked out. The notebook was always there, and I noticed the pages kept turning, but no notes ever left the library. One afternoon, the power flickered for a second. When the lights came back, he was gone. I looked all over, but no sign of him. The books were still there, untouched. I thought maybe he left early. But then the next day, he was back. Same spot, same routine. I started asking around, asked some of the regular students and other staff if they'd seen him. Nobody had. It was like he appeared out of nowhere. Then something else happened. I was shelving books in the environmental science section when I found one of the books from his stack sitting on the floor between the shelves. Weird because it was in a completely different area and it wasn't there the day before. I looked at it, flipped through a few pages. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed a small mark on the inside cover. A faint, barely noticeable symbol. Like a triangle with 3 dots inside it. I'd never seen anything like it in a library book before. I brought it to the desk and compared it to the other copies. None of them had the mark. I asked the cataloging librarian about it, but she was stumped. "Maybe a previous owner wrote it," she said. But these were library books, part of a set we got years ago. No one should have been writing in them. The mark stayed in my mind. A few days later, I caught him looking at me. I was shelving new arrivals when I glanced up and saw him out of the corner of my eye. He was facing the wall as usual, but his head was turned slightly, and for a brief moment our eyes met. His were gray, but empty somehow, like there was nothing behind them. I looked away quickly, feeling a chill. When I looked back, he was pretending to write in his notebook again. I stopped shelving and just watched. He didn't move for a long time. Then the strangest thing happened. The next day, the books he'd been reading were gone from the table. No sign of them anywhere in the library. I checked the checkout logs. No one had checked them out. I looked through the stacks and even asked other librarians if anyone had moved them. No one. I asked the cleaning crew, but they said they hadn't touched that table. It was like the books had vanished. I told Sarah, my girlfriend, about it that evening. She said I should stop paying attention to it, that I was making myself paranoid. I wasn't sure. It didn't feel like paranoia. Over the next week, I tried to watch him more closely. Sometimes I'd catch him just staring at the wall for minutes without moving. Other times, flipping pages in books, but never reading them. One afternoon, I found a book in his stack that wasn't supposed to be in the library at all. A copy of some obscure forestry manual from the 40s that we never got. I checked the catalog and it wasn't listed anywhere. I tried to follow him after he left once. He walked slowly down the street, but then disappeared into the thick woods behind the library. I stood there for a while but didn't see him come out. That night, I went home and found my front door unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it. Inside, nothing was missing, but on my kitchen table was one of those books, the old forestry manual he had with him. I hadn't brought it home. Sarah hadn't been there. I called her, and she said she didn't know anything about it. I put the book back in my car and decided to take it back the next day. When I went back to the library, the man was there again, sitting in his corner like always. I wanted to talk to him, to ask who he was, but I couldn't. He never said a word, never looked me in the eye again. I left the old book on the table near him and walked away. He glanced at it once, then went back to staring at the wall. After that, I started noticing little things. Papers on my desk moved, my computer clock changing by a few minutes, and once I saw a figure outside my window late at night that didn't look quite human, standing still under the porch light before vanishing. I never saw the man again after that day. The books he left behind slowly returned to the shelves with no sign of anyone taking them. The old manual disappeared from my car. Sometimes I still wonder who he was, why he chose those books, and what he wanted from me. But I never got any answers. Just the quiet library, the empty chair in the corner, and the feeling that something was watching from the shadows. I woke up on a Sunday morning feeling off, like my brain was stuck in slow motion. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my bed. The room was dim, curtains drawn, but not completely closed, letting in that soft morning light you get on a cloudy day. I was fully dressed, jeans, a plain black t-shirt, my worn-out sneakers. Nothing about this felt right. I didn't remember getting here. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was faint but distinct, like a mix of old wood and faint lavender. Not something I ever have in my place. I sat up slowly, my head throbbing a little. The apartment was small, almost minimalist. There was a narrow kitchen with a few clean dishes in the sink, a living area with a cheap couch and a small TV mounted on the wall. Nothing flashy, but nothing like my place either. The walls were painted a pale gray, and there was this strange silence that felt heavy, almost like the apartment was holding its breath. I tried to remember how I got there. Nothing. No memories of the night before, no text messages, no phone calls. My phone wasn't on the bedside table where I always left it. In fact, I didn't see a phone anywhere. I checked my pockets. Wallet, keys, lighter, and a small folded piece of paper I didn't recognize. The paper was just a single line, written in neat handwriting. Meet me at 7:30 tonight, 213 Harper Stet. No name, no clue who left it. I tried calling my own number from the landline on the kitchen counter. It rang and rang. No voicemail. The whole situation was confusing. I mean, I live alone. I don't party. I'm not the type to black out and wake up somewhere else, and definitely not somewhere I don't recognize, but that somehow felt familiar. I looked around the apartment for any clues. There were pictures on the walls, but none of them were people I knew. Landscapes, abstract paintings, some photos of a beach I'd never seen. No family photos, no books on shelves, no clutter at all. It was like someone had set up a staged apartment for me, or like I was in a different version of my life. I decided to try to get out. The door was unlocked. When I stepped into the hallway, it was quiet. Almost too quiet for an apartment building during the day. No other doors open, no voices, no sounds except the faint hum of an air vent. Downstairs was a small lobby with old wooden floors and a faded rug. The lobby had this strange smell too, different from the apartment, more metallic, like old plumbing or something. I took the elevator to the street level and stepped outside. The street looked familiar, but not exactly right. It was a residential area by the water. Small shops, a cafe with a faded sign, a florist with a wilted display. The sky was overcast, and there was a chill in the air. I pulled out my phone from my jacket pocket. It wasn't mine. The lock screen showed a date and time that matched today, but the phone was completely unfamiliar. I swiped and saw a couple of photos of a man. Not me, but he looked oddly familiar, kind of like a distorted version of myself. That's when I noticed it. There was a name on the screen, Elliot. The last text message was a simple question. Are you coming tonight? I pocketed the phone and walked toward the address on the paper. 213 Harvest. It was an old apartment building near the docks, the kind of place with peeling paint and rusty mailboxes. I felt a strange pull walking up to the door. I buzzed the apartment, and the door clicked open. I stepped inside, heart beating faster than I wanted. The hallway was dark, but smelled like the same lavender from the other place. I went up the stairs, and on the third floor, I found apartment 7B. The door was cracked open. I pushed it gently and peeked inside. The place was empty, but neat, with one small chair facing the window. Outside, I could see the gray water, the docked boats swaying slightly in the wind. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Did you find the note?" I spun around. There was a man standing there, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and green eyes. He looked calm but intense. His clothes were simple but clean, dark jeans, a light jacket. "Who are you?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "I'm someone you need to talk to. I've been waiting for you." I frowned. "Waiting? I don't know you. I don't know how I got here." He nodded slowly, like he expected me to say that. "That's because you don't remember everything. But you're close." "Close to what?" I asked, feeling more confused than ever. "Do you remember who you really are?" His voice was quiet but firm. I shook my head. "No." He stepped closer, and for a moment I felt like I was looking into something unnatural. His eyes seemed too steady, too sharp. "I don't expect you to understand now," he said, "but you've been elsewhere. You've been somewhere you don't belong, and that place is trying to pull you back." I tried to keep calm, but my throat tightened. "What does that mean? What place?" He glanced toward the window. "Not here. Not there either." I felt cold. "Why are you here?" "To remind you." I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it. "Elliot?" I asked, realizing that was the name from the phone. He nodded. "I don't know what you want from me," I said. "I don't know who you are or why you're here." He smiled again, a little softer this time. "Maybe you don't have to know. Not yet." He turned to leave. I called out, "Wait, how do I get home? How do I get back to my life?" He stopped, looked back, eyes calm but unreadable. "You already are home. You just don't realize it." Then he walked out, closing the door softly behind him. I stood there alone for a while, staring out at the gray water. I didn't know what to think. Who was Elliot? Why did I feel like I didn't belong anywhere? And why did this apartment feel both strange and familiar? I walked back down the stairs and out onto the street. When I got home later that evening, my own apartment felt different, too cluttered, too noisy. I kept thinking about the empty apartment, the note, Elliot's eyes. I still don't know what really happened that morning or how I ended up where I did. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I swear I catch a glimpse of someone else, a face that's almost mine but not quite. And sometimes late at night, my phone lights up with a message from an unknown number that just says, "Do you remember yet?" I met Harper on a Saturday afternoon at the local farmer's market in my town. A small place, nothing fancy, mostly regulars buying vegetables and baked goods. It was the kind of weekend ritual I'd started a few months back, just to get out of the house and see some people. I didn't expect to meet anyone new, honestly, but there she was, standing by the apple stand, examining a bunch of crisp Granny Smiths. I don't even remember exactly what made me talk to her. Maybe it was the way she held the apples, like she was trying to figure out which one was perfect. I asked her if she wanted a recommendation. She smiled, soft, polite, and said she was new in town, just moved a few weeks ago. Her name was Harper. Over the next few weeks, we met up a few times, sometimes at the market, sometimes at a coffee shop nearby. She was quiet, but easy to be around, never pushed too hard to talk about herself. She seemed interested in whatever I was saying, but there was this odd distance to her, like she wasn't quite part of the place. One thing that started bothering me early on was that whenever I took photos while we were together, Harper never showed up in any of them. I mean, not a shadow, not a blur, nothing. It was like she was invisible to the camera. The first time I noticed it, we'd been at the town's little park. I was trying to take a picture of the trees with the sun coming through, and Harper was sitting right next to me on the bench. Later, scrolling through the photos on my phone, I saw the bench was empty. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Maybe the phone camera messed up, so I brought my DSLR next time, figuring a higher quality camera wouldn't just miss someone standing right there. We were at the local library's outdoor event, some kind of craft fair. I snapped a picture of the two of us sitting on a picnic blanket, Harper smiling at me. I checked the photo immediately. Again, she was missing. The blanket was there, the trees, me, but no Harper. I showed her. She just laughed, a little too easily. "Maybe I'm a ghost," she said, grinning. But it wasn't funny to me. The next time I tried, I made a point to take pictures whenever she was standing next to me, or when a group photo came up. Every time, same result. The camera caught everything but Harper. At some point, I started testing it more deliberately. I'd take photos when she wasn't expecting it, or when she was turned away. She was always there, talking, moving, laughing, but the photos were blank where she stood. We had a few long talks about it. She said she didn't know why it was happening and seemed genuinely confused. I tried to bring it up casually when we were out, but she always changed the subject or smiled and said, "Some things are better left unexplained." I felt a growing unease. It wasn't just the photos. It was the way she didn't seem to have a real reflection. One afternoon, I asked her to look into a shop window with me. Just a little test. But when we looked, her reflection was barely there, like a faint blur. I figured maybe the angle was wrong or the glass was tinted weirdly, but the feeling stuck with me. I started noticing other things too. When we walked past people, sometimes they'd glance at her oddly, like they sensed something off but couldn't place it. Once a little kid stared at her for what felt like an unnervingly long time before running away, crying. It was on one rainy evening when we were walking home from a small diner that I finally confronted her. "Harper, what are you?" I said, voice low. She stopped, looked at me carefully. The rain was falling lightly, the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. "I'm not sure I know," she replied quietly. That answer didn't help. I wanted to believe she was just some stranger with a rare condition or something supernatural that was more odd than harmful. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that she wasn't just a normal person who couldn't be caught on film. I started to get scared. Not in a typical way, but like being around her was stepping into some place I didn't understand, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know the rules. One night, after we'd been hanging out for a few months, I invited her over to my apartment. It was small, cluttered, but mine. I figured if anything was strange, I might catch it there. We were sitting on the couch watching a movie when I took out my phone to snap a quick picture of us. The flash went off. I looked immediately at the screen. She wasn't in the photo. I held the phone up to her face. "Try this," I said. She smiled softly, put her hand over the lens, and nothing happened. "Let me try," I said, taking the phone back. I aimed it at her and took several pictures in quick succession. Not a single one showed her. Her smile didn't falter. She seemed calm, almost tired. I said, "I need to know what you are. Why can't I take your picture?" She looked down, then back up at me. "I'm not like you, but I'm here. At least, I try to be." I didn't press further. I wasn't sure what I wanted from her, or what I could handle knowing. After that night, the visits became less frequent. Harper said she had to leave town for a while. I didn't argue. Before she went, she handed me a small notebook. "For when I'm gone," she said. I opened it later to find pages filled with drawings of places I'd never been, strange symbols, and sketches of people who looked almost human, but had features that didn't quite add up. I kept the notebook on my shelf, hoping for answers that never came. Months passed. I went back to the market, to the park, to my old routines. But sometimes, when I look through photos from those days, I catch a glimpse of a shadow where Harper should be, a flicker of something almost there, but not quite. And sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I swear I see her watching, calm, quiet, waiting for me to understand. I don't know what she was or why she never showed up in the pictures. All I know is that meeting her changed something in how I see the world. And maybe that's enough. I called a taxi late one evening after a long shift at the restaurant. It was just past midnight, and the neighborhood felt quiet, the kind of still where every little sound is amplified. The streets were damp from earlier rain, and the air smelled like wet asphalt, mixed with the faint scent of smoke from someone's fireplace down the block. The cab pulled up, an older model sedan with a faded yellow paint job. The driver was a man who looked to be in his 50s, maybe early 60s, with thinning gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. He had a calm, steady presence. I gave him my address, a small street on the edge of the neighborhood where I lived alone in a cramped apartment. He nodded but didn't say much, just a quiet, "Got it." I buckled in and tried to relax after my shift. Usually, the ride home was straightforward, just a 10-minute trip, but almost immediately he turned in the opposite direction. At first, I thought maybe there was a detour or road work. I glanced out the window, watching familiar blocks pass by, but the driver didn't make a single comment. He just kept driving. After 10 minutes, I said, "Hey, this isn't the way to my place. Are you sure you're headed there?" He didn't look at me. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the road ahead, calm and unreadable. Then he said, almost like it was a statement of fact, "Sometimes the path isn't what it seems." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He shrugged lightly, hands steady on the wheel. "Sometimes the shortest way isn't the true way. You get where you're supposed to go by following the road less traveled." I blinked, unsure if he was joking or just weird. The city streets started to look less familiar, though. We were driving deeper into the neighborhood, but the houses were older, the streetlights flickering and the air growing cooler. I checked my phone. No signal. Weird, because I usually had decent reception around here. We kept circling. Blocks and blocks of streets I recognized, but that didn't match the way home. I tried to stay calm, thinking maybe he was taking me on some kind of sightseeing detour or that he'd gotten mixed up. But an hour went by and I was still in the cab, still not close to my apartment. "Are you lost?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not lost, just following the path." I started to get a little freaked out. I looked at his face in the dim cab light. There was something off about him. His eyes didn't reflect the streetlights like a normal person's would. They were almost too clear, like glass. And that expression, calm, steady, like he knew exactly what was happening, even if I didn't. I asked, "Why are you doing this?" He glanced at me briefly, and his smile was slow, almost deliberate. "Sometimes you have to take a longer route to see what's really there." I wanted to say something else, but the words caught in my throat. The rain started again, light at first, then heavier. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth, blurring the street outside. The world looked strange, more muted, like a film playing in slow motion. We passed a park I recognized, but the playground was empty and dark, shadows hanging heavy over the swings. I tried to make sense of it all, but everything felt distant. After a while, I noticed the other cars on the street seemed older, the models from years ago. The street signs looked worn, faded in a way I hadn't seen before. It felt like I'd stepped back in time, or maybe sideways into some parallel version of the neighborhood. I rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, the driver's face hadn't changed. The same calm smile, the same unreadable eyes. "Where exactly are we?" I asked. He didn't answer, just kept driving. I started to notice little things, a bird perched on a street lamp that didn't fly away when we passed, a shadow in a second-story window that vanished as soon as I blinked, the absence of any other pedestrians. Then I realized the radio had been off the whole time, but now it clicked on by itself, playing a soft, static-filled tune I couldn't place. It felt like a lullaby, but distorted, stretched out. I looked at the driver again, and his eyes caught mine for a moment. There was a strange intensity there, something that felt too controlled to be natural. I swallowed hard and said, "Please, just take me home." He nodded, and the car turned again. This time, the streets started to feel familiar again. The trees, the cracked sidewalks, the faint glow from my apartment building's windows. When the cab finally stopped in front of my building, I reached for my wallet. The driver shook his head. "No charge." I blinked, confused. "What?" He smiled that same slow smile and said, "Sometimes the path isn't what it seems." I got out and closed the door behind me, watching as the cab pulled away, slowly fading into the mist that had settled over the street. Back inside my apartment, I checked my phone again. Signal was back, no missed calls, no messages. But when I looked in the mirror later that night, I caught something in my reflection. A flash of that calm, empty smile behind my own eyes. And I still don't know what that meant. It was a Thursday night, sometime after 9, and I'd stopped at this little 24-hour diner off Route 11 because I hadn't eaten since lunch. The place was almost empty. One guy at the counter, nursing coffee, a tired-looking waitress refilling sugar jars, and a couple booths occupied near the back. I slid into one halfway down the row, ordered a grilled cheese and fries, and just sat there, zoning out. The guy in the booth behind me must have come in right after I did, because I didn't notice him until I heard him talking. At first, I thought he was on the phone, that low, steady voice people have when they're having some long story conversation. But there was no pause like you'd expect from someone listening to another person. It was just him, talking in this even, almost flat tone. I didn't catch the start of it, but then I realized he was saying street names. Not streets I recognized from around here, but they felt weirdly familiar. He said Briarwood and Tanner Lane, and I thought, those are from my hometown. Then Bellamy Square, that tiny strip of shops where the old bakery used to be before it burned down in the 80s. That's when my brain did this little double take. I'm from a town 8 hours from here. I'd never met anyone in this state who'd even heard of it, let alone could rattle off exact spots like that. I figured maybe he'd lived there too. But the way he described it was off. He wasn't talking about it like you or I would talk about a place we grew up in. He was listing things like he was walking through them in his head, one after another, in a fixed order. And then you pass the hardware store with the red siding, and across from that there's the pharmacy, not the new one, the old one with the green awning, the cobbler's shop on the corner, 2 doors down from Mrs. Albright's sewing store. Mrs. Albright's was gone before my mom was even born. I only know about it because I'd seen the sign in a black and white photo in our local library's archive. I twisted a little in my seat, trying to catch a glimpse without making it obvious. He was sitting alone, facing the opposite direction, so I only saw the back of his head. Neat brown hair, combed perfectly, collar of a crisp white shirt above what looked like a gray jacket. No phone on the table that I could see. I listened for another minute. He kept going, street by street, storefront by storefront, describing a town that existed decades before I was born, and doing it in the present tense, like it was all still there. He mentioned the train depot on Pine, which had been torn down in the 70s, and a fountain in the park that was removed after it cracked one winter. I was leaning back just enough to maybe hear better when he said, without a pause, "You lived on Fern Street." I froze. I didn't move for a solid few seconds. Fern Street is where I grew up. He didn't say it like a guess either. He said it like it was just another fact, like the hardware store or the park fountain. I turned fully then, pretending to adjust in my seat. I saw the side of his face, pale, clean-shaven, not young but not old. No lines around his eyes, no visible blemishes. His gaze wasn't on me. It was fixed dead ahead on the empty booth across from him. His lips kept moving in that steady rhythm, even though I couldn't make out the words now. My grilled cheese came, and the waitress lingered just a second too long before leaving. I thought about saying something to her, asking if she knew the guy, but she seemed distracted and hurried off to refill the coffee at the counter. When I looked back, he was quiet, just sitting there, hands folded on the table, staring straight ahead. His plate was empty. I hadn't even seen him eat. I told myself I'd just pay and leave, but curiosity got the better of me. I slid out, took my check up to the counter, and on the way back I walked past his booth slow enough to glance in. There was no coffee cup, no plate, nothing. Just an empty tabletop. I looked around. He wasn't at the register, not in the bathroom hallway, not walking out the door. The guy at the counter was still hunched over his mug, and the waitress was behind him topping off the sugar jar. I hadn't heard the door chime once. I asked the waitress, "Hey, did the man who was sitting back there leave already?" She looked at me like I'd asked about someone from a week ago. "You were the only one in a booth," she said. I told her no, there was a guy in the one right behind me. Gray jacket, white shirt. She frowned and said she hadn't served anyone else all night. When I got to my car, I just sat there with the engine idling, staring at the diner through the glass. From my angle, I could see both my old booth and the one behind it. Both empty. On the drive back to my motel, I kept replaying his voice in my head. The way he'd said, "You lived on Fern Street, like it wasn't strange at all, like he knew me, like he'd known me before I was even born. It was raining that Thursday morning, not a heavy downpour, just that steady, misty kind that gets into your clothes no matter how fast you walk. I'd missed my earlier bus, so I ended up on the 7:20 into the city, which I almost never take. I remember being annoyed because I knew it would be more crowded, more stop and go. The bus smelled like wet coats and cheap coffee. I slid into an empty aisle seat near the middle and tried to shake the rain off my hood without hitting the person next to me. I was already pulling out my earbuds when I noticed the man 2 rows ahead by the window. Noticed him for no reason at first. Just another passenger, maybe mid-30s, short, dark hair, wearing a gray windbreaker and jeans. He had this small scar, maybe half an inch, above his right eyebrow, a faint little crescent shape. I don't know why I clocked it, just something my eyes picked up before I looked away. The bus jerked forward and I settled in, looking out the rain-blurred window. But a few minutes later, when we pulled up to the next stop, I caught sight of someone else climbing aboard. My stomach tightened before my brain even figured out why. He was wearing the same gray windbreaker, same jeans, same short dark hair, and when he turned to look down the aisle for a seat, same face. Exactly the same. It wasn't just that they could have been brothers, it was the same. The scar was in the same place, same faint line above the eyebrow. The shape of the nose, the jaw, even the way they both held their shoulders slightly forward. I looked back at the first guy, 2 rows ahead, and then at the new one standing in the aisle. Neither of them reacted. No recognition. The second one finally sat toward the back, on the opposite side of the bus, a few seats behind me. I told myself maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I just glanced too quickly. But every time I checked, pretending to adjust my hair or look around, it was still true. Same face, same clothes. The only difference was that the one near the front kept his eyes out the window, while the one behind me stared straight ahead most of the ride. At one point, I got up to let someone out of my row and caught the back one in my peripheral vision. I turned just enough to see his eyes. Same exact shade of light brown as the first. He blinked slowly, not breaking eye contact, and then looked away like nothing happened. A woman sitting across from me must have noticed I kept glancing back because she gave me this little frown like she thought I was being nosy. But I couldn't help it. I wanted to see something, a smirk, a nod, some sign they were in on a joke. But they didn't look at each other, not once. When we hit the highway stretch, the bus got quiet except for the tires on wet pavement. I put my earbuds in but didn't play anything. I wanted to hear if they spoke. They didn't. A few stops later, the guy in the front got up and walked toward the door. As he passed my row, I caught a whiff of something sharp, like metal or maybe that weird smell electronics have when they overheat. He stepped off into the drizzle without looking back. The second one stayed seated. I thought, okay, maybe now I can relax. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. But 2 stops later, the second one stood and got off too, at a completely different part of town. That should have been the end of it. But when I reached my stop and got off, I saw him again. The first one, across the street, under an awning. No umbrella, hands in his pockets, just staring down the block. I froze because I didn't think he'd see me. Then his head turned, slow, deliberate, and his eyes locked on mine. No smile, no nod, just watching. I started walking toward my office, telling myself to knock it off, stop being paranoid. But halfway down the block, a reflection in a shop window made me glance back. The other one, the second one, was crossing the street behind me. I walked faster, cutting down a side street, and when I finally reached my building, I didn't look around again. I badged in, took the elevator up, and tried to focus on work. But at lunch, when I went down to the cafe in the lobby, I saw a figure pass by outside, gray windbreaker. I didn't leave the office until after dark, and I took a different bus home. The whole ride I kept my head down, barely looking at anyone. But at one point, we stopped at a light and I glanced out. Across the intersection, leaning against a lamppost in the drizzle, someone stood watching the bus. Gray windbreaker. Small crescent scar over the eyebrow. I was on my way to a client job in northern New Mexico, driving alone through that stretch of desert where the roads go straight for miles and the horizon feels too far away. My GPS had lost signal about an hour earlier, and I'd been coasting on memory, thinking I'd recognize the turnoff when I saw it. By late afternoon, the light had gone that pale yellow that makes every shadow look longer than it should. I hadn't passed another car in at least 20 minutes when I spotted a pull-off with a single rusted picnic table and one of those green highway trash cans. There was a man standing beside it, facing the road, like he'd been waiting for something. He was tall, maybe late 50s, in a brown windbreaker and pressed khaki pants. No hat, no sunglasses, no bag. His hair was perfectly combed, even in the breeze. I slowed down and pulled onto the gravel, figuring I'd ask if he knew the way to Los Cerrillos, which was where my job site was. I rolled down the passenger window as I stopped. "Hey," I said, leaning toward him. "Do you know how to get to Los Cerrillos from here?" Without a pause, without even asking where I'd come from, he started reciting, 17.4 miles east on this road, turn left at the white post marked 28B. That's a 43-degree angle turn. Continue for 22.6 miles, then turn right at the second cattle guard. You'll arrive in exactly 53 minutes and 19 seconds, given your current speed. He said it like he was reading from a list he'd already memorized. No hesitation, no I think or about, just precise numbers, down to decimal points. I stared at him for a second, trying to figure out if I'd misheard. Okay, thanks." He gave a single nod, like that was the end of the conversation. His eyes didn't leave mine the entire time, and he hadn't moved a muscle except for his mouth. I put the car in gear and rolled back onto the highway, glancing in the mirror as I merged. He was still standing there, in the exact same spot, facing the road, hands at his sides. About a mile down, I realized something that made my stomach drop a little. I'd never told him where I was starting from. He shouldn't have been able to give me exact mileage or timing without knowing my route, or even knowing which direction I'd be going. I tried to brush it off. Maybe there was only one logical route to Los Cerrillos from here, and he just assumed. But the thing was, I could have come from two completely different highways, depending on where I'd started the day. As I drove, I kept checking my odometer against what he'd said. At exactly 17.4 miles, there was the white post marked 28B. I turned left just to see if the rest lined up. The road was narrow, almost like a private ranch route. Scrub brush on both sides, no other traffic. The shadows were stretching farther now, and the sun had slipped low enough that the land looked flat and empty in every direction. At 22.6 miles, I hit a cattle guard. I slowed, thinking maybe that was the turn, but there was no right-hand road, just a faint dirt track disappearing into a dry wash. I figured he must have meant farther ahead. That's when I noticed the clock on my dash. From the moment I'd left him, the minutes and seconds were lining up exactly with the number he'd given. Every time I checked, the estimate was still dead on, even when I'd slowed a couple of times for turns. I told myself it was coincidence, but it felt too exact. I even stopped for a few seconds to get a drink from my water bottle before starting again, thinking it would throw the timing off. It didn't. The remaining time just picked up where it should have been if I hadn't stopped. As I got closer to the supposed destination, I started watching the horizon for buildings or lights. There was nothing. Just low hills and a single stretch of wire fence running alongside the road. With 1 minute left on the clock, I came to another cattle guard. This one had a dirt road leading off to the right. No signs, no mailboxes. I slowed to a crawl, and without knowing why, I glanced in the rearview mirror. A man in a brown windbreaker was standing by the side of the road about 50 yards back. Same pressed khaki pants, same perfectly combed hair. He wasn't walking, just standing there, facing me. My first thought was that I'd looped around somehow, but I hadn't taken any turns since the last marker. I pressed the gas and turned onto the dirt road, not wanting to see if he'd follow. The road went maybe half a mile before ending at a gate chained shut. Beyond it was just open land. I sat there for a second, engine idling, feeling like I'd been sent somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. When I turned around and headed back, the stretch where I'd seen him was empty. No car, no person, no footprints in the dust by the road. I got back to the highway just as the sun dipped below the horizon. My GPS flickered back to life a few miles later, rerouting me to Los Cerrillos by a completely different route than the one he'd given. I didn't see another person until I hit the lights of the next town. It was just after midnight when I pulled off the interstate. I'd been driving for hours, heading east out of Boise toward a client meeting in Wyoming the next morning, and the caffeine from the last gas station coffee had worn off. My legs were stiff and my eyes were starting to blur, so when I saw the blue rest area sign, I figured I'd stretch and maybe splash some water on my face. The place was empty except for one flickering overhead light by the sidewalk. It was that kind of industrial orange glow, but the bulb kept stuttering, on, off, on again, like it was struggling to stay alive. Underneath it was a man in a gray business suit, standing perfectly still with a briefcase in his right hand. I slowed as I passed the lot entrance, thinking maybe he needed help, but he didn't move. He didn't even glance at my car, at least not in the normal way. His head turned slightly, but it wasn't like he was tracking me. It was more like he'd already been looking at me before I got there. There was something odd about how he stood. His feet were too close together, shoulders squared like he was posing for a school photo, and he was staring straight ahead, eyes wide open. No blinking. The briefcase hung straight down from his hand, not swinging at all, even in the light breeze. I parked at the far end of the lot, maybe 8 or 9 spaces from him. The second I turned off the engine, I noticed my radio was still playing faintly, just static and a late-night talk station fading in and out. The announcer was reading traffic updates from somewhere in Nevada. That's when I realized his lips were moving. At first, I thought he was talking to himself, maybe rehearsing something, but the timing was too exact. His mouth was matching every single word the announcer was saying. Perfectly. I watched for maybe 10 seconds, thinking it had to be a coincidence. It wasn't. Even when the station faded for a second and came back with the guy saying, "Construction delays expected through the weekend," the man's mouth opened and closed in perfect sync. My stomach knotted. I stayed in the car longer than I meant to, just gripping the steering wheel and pretending to look through my glove box. The light above him buzzed, flickered, and the shadows jumped every time it cut out. But he didn't react to the changes in brightness at all. I told myself I was being paranoid. I got out, locked the door, and started toward the bathroom building. The air felt heavy, colder than it should have been for July. I kept my eyes down, trying not to look at him, but I couldn't help glancing when I got close enough. He was still staring in my direction, but it wasn't like he saw me. His pupils didn't shift or focus. The closer I got, the more I could hear. Soft, almost inaudible murmuring, timed exactly with the radio announcer still playing from my car. My chest tightened. I didn't slow down, just went straight into the bathroom. Inside, it smelled like industrial cleaner. The hum from the fluorescent lights was louder than normal, or maybe my ears were just ringing. I splashed water on my face, trying to shake the feeling that he might be standing right outside the door. When I stepped back out, he had turned, just slightly. He wasn't facing me head-on, but now his body was angled like he might start walking. His lips had stopped moving. The briefcase was still hanging the same way, but now both his shoes were pointing toward my car. I walked faster. My keys were already in my hand, but when I got close, I froze. My driver's side door was unlocked. I knew I'd locked it. I heard the beep when I walked away. The radio was louder now. Not by much, but enough that I noticed. The announcer was in the middle of a weather report for some city I'd never heard of. I got in, slammed the door, locked it again, and started the engine. I should have just driven off. But as I pulled out, I glanced back through the rear view. The man was now standing at the edge of the lot, where the sidewalk met the pavement, facing the road. The flickering light was behind him, so his face was in shadow, but I could still make out his mouth moving again. The radio announcer's voice was still going, still in sync. I drove back onto the interstate. The rest stop disappeared in the darkness, and for a while I tried to convince myself it was some weird coincidence, that maybe he had an earpiece and was mouthing along to something. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't fit. 10 minutes later, I noticed the static on the radio had vanished. The same announcer was still speaking, but now the reception was crystal clear. like the station was broadcasting from right next to me. I reached to turn it off, and that's when I saw movement in the rear view. Far behind me, on the shoulder, under another streetlight, was a man in a business suit. Same height, same stance, same briefcase. I kept my eyes on the road after that. Didn't check again until I was near the next exit, where I finally switched the radio off. The silence felt wrong too, but I didn't turn it back on. I didn't stop until I hit town. When I parked outside my motel, I noticed my driver's side door was unlocked again. It was a Tuesday evening, late enough that the commuter rush had already thinned out. I'd stayed at the office in Tacoma to finish up a project, and by the time I got to the platform, the sky was dark and the station lights had that buzzing sodium yellow hue. The train smelled faintly like wet metal from the rain earlier. When I got on, my car was almost empty, just a handful of people scattered around. I took a seat by the window, halfway down, with my bag on the floor between my feet. Across from me, in the set of seats that faced mine, there was a man in his mid-40s wearing a navy overcoat and carrying a leather satchel. He was sitting stiffly, hands clasped on top of the satchel, looking slightly to the left, toward the aisle, not toward me. Nothing unusual. He looked like any other guy heading home after work. I leaned my head against the window and let my eyes drift toward the dark glass. It was the usual nighttime train reflection. Me, the man across from me, the dim interior, and the blurred lights of the city slipping by outside. That's when I noticed it. In the reflection, the man wasn't looking toward the aisle. He was looking straight at me. At first, I figured it was a trick of the angle. Maybe he was glancing up and I just caught it at the exact moment. But then the train jolted slightly, and his real head turned a little more toward the aisle. In the reflection, his head followed the same movement perfectly, but his eyes didn't move. They stayed locked on mine. I stared at the glass for a few seconds, my pulse picking up. I even blinked a few times, trying to clear my vision. The real him was angled away, like he was watching the far side of the car. But in the window, those eyes, they weren't blinking. I looked down at my phone to break the moment. I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was overtired, or maybe the Rain Street glass was distorting things. But curiosity got the better of me after a few minutes. I tilted my head slightly, enough to see both him and his reflection in my peripheral vision. The timing was perfect. His real hand lifted from his satchel to adjust his cuff. The reflection did the exact same motion at the exact same moment. But the reflection's head didn't move. Its gaze didn't leave mine. I felt my jaw tighten. The sound of the train wheels on the track seemed louder than usual, more hollow somehow. I shifted in my seat, glancing at the other passengers. 2 college kids near the back, a woman in a red scarf farther up. None of them were paying attention. I tried looking directly at him. His real eyes weren't visible from this angle. His head was still turned just enough that I could only see part of his face. He didn't react, didn't seem to notice me at all. I glanced back at the reflection. The eyes were still there, staring. And now that I was really looking, there was something off about them. The irises were too pale, almost gray, and the pupils didn't seem to change with the passing station lights. I pressed my palm against the glass, like that would somehow make the reflection behave normally. It didn't. The reflection's eyes followed the exact tilt of my head as I moved. The real man didn't shift at all. The train slowed for the next station. The overhead lights flickered for a second as we pulled in, and for the brief moment they went out, I saw only my own faint reflection in the black window, no one else's. But when the lights came back on, his was there again, watching. A couple of people boarded and shuffled past. The man across from me didn't move, didn't even glance up. I thought about changing cars, but I didn't want to make it obvious I was uncomfortable. I tried something different. I reached down into my bag, pretending to rummage for something, while keeping the corner of my eye on the window. His real body shifted slightly as the train turned, but in the reflection, the head finally moved, just a little, and the mouth opened, like he was saying something. I couldn't hear a thing. The movement was slow, deliberate, like each syllable was being formed carefully. His real self's lips never moved. I straightened up, heart thudding hard enough I could feel it in my throat. My stop was still 4 stations away, I thought about standing, but my legs felt heavy. The announcer's voice came over the intercom, muffled and distorted. While it played, the reflection's mouth moved perfectly in time with it, like it was lip-syncing. The real man still sat motionless, looking away. I stopped looking at the window for a while. I just stared at the floor and counted the seconds until the next station. When we finally pulled in, I made myself get up. My knees felt unsteady, but I slung my bag over my shoulder and stepped toward the doors. As they opened, I couldn't help glancing back. The man was still sitting there. But in the window behind him, the reflection's head had turned fully toward me, and both its hands were now resting on the glass in the reflection, palms flat, fingers spread, like it was on the other side, leaning closer. I stepped off the train without looking again. I didn't see him follow me onto the platform. But as the train pulled away, I caught one last glimpse in the window of the car. The seat where he'd been sitting was empty. The reflection was still there. I was driving back from visiting my cousin in Eastern Oregon, taking one of those long two-lane highways that feel like they cut through the middle of nowhere. It was late afternoon, the kind of overcast sky that flattens the light so you can't tell if it's getting close to evening or not. I'd been watching my gas gauge dip for the last 20 miles, so when I spotted a faded sign for a station up ahead, I figured I'd stop. The place looked old, but not abandoned. One pump island, a little shop with a single front window, and a tall sign with half the letters missing. The gravel crunched under my tires when I pulled in. I'd barely shifted into park when a man stepped out from around the side of the building. He was wearing a blue work shirt with Martin stitched on a patch over the pocket and a tan cap pulled low. He smiled as he walked up, one hand already on the pump handle. "Evening," he said, cheerful. "Fill it up?" I nodded, rolled my window down halfway, and handed him my card. He swiped it on a little handheld reader hanging from his belt, then started pumping gas. "Bit of a cold snap coming in tonight," he said, glancing at the clouds. "Gonna be down to the high 20s after sunset." I remember blinking at that because I'd been driving all day in short sleeves with the windows cracked. My car thermometer had read 74 when I pulled in. "Really?" I said. "Feels pretty warm right now." Martin chuckled, like I'd made a joke. "Not for long. Last night it was barely over 30 by the time the moon was up." Something about the way he said it made me check my own watch, even though that didn't have anything to do with temperature. It was 4:42 p.m. He kept chatting, asked where I was headed, if I'd passed the road construction near Ochoco. His voice was easy, calm, like we were old neighbors catching up. I found myself answering without thinking much about it, but I kept glancing at my dashboard thermometer, which still said 74. When the pump clicked off, he handed me my card back and thanked me like I'd done him a favor by stopping in. I got out to stretch my legs, and he stepped away from the pump island, walking toward the far side of the building like he was going to check something. I figured I'd go in and grab a drink before heading out. The shop door had a little bell that rang when I opened it, and the inside smelled faintly of motor oil and old candy. A woman in her late 50s stood behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. "Hey there," I said, setting a bottle of water on the counter. "You got a good guy working the pumps out there." She looked up, puzzled. "Working the pumps?" I smiled, thinking she was joking. "Yeah, Martin. Blue shirt, cap. He filled me up." Her brow furrowed. "Honey, we haven't had a pump attendant in, must be 6, 7 years now. It's self-serve." I just stared at her for a second. "No, I mean, he was just out there. He took my card and everything." She shook her head slowly, like she wasn't sure if I was messing with her. "I'm the only one here. Has been all day." I didn't know what to say to that. I pulled out my wallet, slid a 20 across for the water, and stepped back outside without pushing it. The pump island was empty. No sign of Martin. The gravel lot stretched out on all sides, flat and open, no cars but mine. I glanced toward the side of the building where he'd walked earlier. Nothing. I climbed back into my car, shut the door, and sat there with the engine off for a minute. The temperature reading on my dash still said 74. The air coming in through the cracked window was mild, the kind of early fall warmth that sinks slow. When I backed out, I drove past the far side of the building and into that just to see. There was only a stack of old tires, a rusty dumpster, and weeds pushing through the gravel. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there at all. I got back on the highway. About 10 minutes later, I realized I was gripping the steering wheel too tight. My mind kept replaying his voice, the way he'd smiled like we were sharing some casual, harmless talk. The weather he'd described didn't match reality, but it also hadn't sounded like a guess. He'd said it like it was a certainty, like it was already happening. And the weirdest part was my card. I checked my banking app at the next rest stop. There was no charge from the station, nothing from anywhere in that town. It was only later, maybe 30 miles down the road, that I noticed something else. My car thermometer had dropped to 52, and I hadn't crossed into any higher elevation. The sun was still an hour from setting. It was late fall, and I was driving back from visiting a friend in Pueblo, Colorado. The sun had already set, and the last bit of light was just a faint orange line under a heavy, dark sky. The highway was nearly empty, just miles of scrubland and barbed wire fences on either side. The air felt cold in that dry, high-altitude way where your breath seems sharper than usual. I'd been on the road for about an hour when I saw a figure standing on the shoulder ahead, facing the road. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to see a hitchhiker. No nearby gas station, no town, nothing but a ranch road about half a mile back. He was wearing a long, dusty brown coat that looked like it had been through hell, the hem frayed and darker at the bottom like it had been dragged through mud. He wasn't holding out his thumb, just standing there, perfectly still. As I got closer, he raised his arm and waved once. It wasn't a frantic wave, more like he already knew I was going to stop. And I did stop, though I can't explain why. I rolled down the passenger window just a few inches, keeping my seatbelt on. "Evening," I said, trying to sound casual. He stepped closer, stopping just outside arm's reach. His face was pale, almost grayish, and the first thing I noticed were his eyes. His pupils were so dilated there was no visible color, just solid black, like someone had replaced his irises with ink. The second thing I noticed was that he wasn't blinking, not once. "Have you seen the craft?" he asked. His voice was calm, too calm, every word deliberate and evenly spaced, like he'd practiced saying them. Not an accent I could place, but not local. I laughed awkwardly. "The craft? Like an airplane?" His head tilted slightly, like he didn't understand the joke. "It passed over here, low to the ground. I'm following it." Something about the way he said, "following it," made my stomach twist. I glanced at the empty highway ahead and behind us. "Haven't seen anything," I said. "Sorry." He didn't move. His hands were buried deep in the pockets of his coat, but I could see the faintest twitch in the fabric, like his fingers were shifting or fidgeting in a slow, methodical way. "You would know if you had seen it," he said finally. His mouth made the shape of a smile, but his eyes didn't change at all. The silence after that stretched too long. I started to roll the window up, but before it was halfway, he leaned slightly toward the opening and said, "It left something here. It isn't safe." I didn't wait to respond. I just put the car in gear and pulled away. In the rearview mirror, I expected to see him walking back toward wherever he'd come from, but he hadn't moved, just standing there in the exact same spot, watching me. About 10 minutes later, I passed a side road with a cluster of dark farm buildings and a single-yard light buzzing faintly in the distance. A figure was standing at the corner where the road met the highway. Same coat, same stance. The light from my headlights hit his face for a second, and the pupils were still blown wide. My heart started pounding so hard I had to take my foot off the gas for a moment. I knew there was no way he could have gotten there ahead of me. No car, no bike, and I hadn't seen anyone cutting across the scrub. But there he was, standing like he'd been waiting. I kept driving, telling myself it was impossible, that maybe it was just someone else in a similar coat. But the way he watched my car as I passed, turning his head slowly, tracking me until I was out of view, felt too deliberate. Another 20 minutes went by before I reached the small town where I'd planned to stop for gas. It was one of those places where the station is also a convenience store, and there's nothing else open after 9. I pulled up to the pump, got out, and immediately felt that same prickling at the back of my neck. Across the street, under a dim street lamp, someone was standing on the sidewalk. Dusty coat, not moving. The traffic light at the intersection cycled from green to yellow to red, and the figure didn't shift an inch. My hands were shaking so bad I fumbled with the gas cap. I went inside to pay and decided I'd ask the clerk if he'd noticed anyone hanging around. The guy behind the counter was probably in his early 20s, leaning over a phone. I described the man, the coat, the eyes. The clerk looked at me for a second, then said, "No one like that's been in here." Then he added, almost offhand, "But you're not the first person to mention him." That was enough for me. I didn't even grab snacks like I usually do for a long drive. I just got back in the car and took the highway out of town. I didn't see him again until I was about 30 miles from home. My route took me through a stretch of state forest where the road narrows and the trees press in on sides. My high beams caught movement ahead, a figure stepping just far enough onto the shoulder to be seen. Dusty coat. I didn't slow down this time. I kept my eyes straight ahead, but I swear I felt his gaze following me, like the pressure of someone standing too close. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was after midnight. The motion sensor light flicked on, flooding the yard in white light. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, trying to calm down. Then I noticed something on the hood of my car. A perfect circle, about the size of a dinner plate, traced in what looked like fine gray dust. It hadn't been there when I left my friend's house. It wasn't like road grime. It was uniform, deliberate, like it had been placed there. I didn't touch it. I just went inside and locked every door. The next morning, the circle was gone. Not smudged, not washed away by dew, just gone, like it had never been there at all. It was late January, and I decided to hike a section of the Timberline Trail near Mount Hood. I live about an hour away, and when the weather cooperates, I like to get out there, even in winter. That day was gray but clear, maybe 25 degrees, no wind. The snow on the trail was crusted over, and my boots crunched with every step. I didn't expect to see anyone. It's pretty remote in winter, and most people stick to lower elevations. I was about 3 miles in, is not far from a ridgeline that overlooks a frozen creek, when I noticed a figure ahead on the trail. At first I thought it was just a stump or rock, but then it shifted, stepped to the side. As I got closer, I saw it was a man, maybe mid-30s, wearing a faded red t-shirt, light tan shorts, and old running shoes. No hat, no gloves. His skin was pale, like he hadn't been in the sun in years. It bothered me right away. Not just the clothes, though that was insane for the temperature, but the way he was standing. He was perfectly still, arms hanging loosely, looking straight ahead like he was waiting for something. When I got within maybe 20 feet, he turned his head toward me slowly. Not in a jerky way, just deliberate. I said, "Hey, aren't you freezing?" and tried to smile so it wouldn't sound like I was judging him. He tilted his head a little, almost like a dog hearing a strange sound. His eyes didn't blink. Then he said, in this flat, careful voice, "It's 73 degrees." I laughed awkwardly. No, it's not. It's below freezing." He just stared at me for another couple seconds, still not blinking. Then he said, "It's 73 degrees." Again, exactly the same as before. Same tone, same rhythm, like he was repeating a memorized line. Something in me wanted to just keep moving, so I gave a quick, "All right, stay warm," and walked past him. I could feel his eyes on my back the whole time. I didn't look over my shoulder until I was maybe 50 yards down the trail. When I did, he was still in the same spot, facing me, arms at his sides. I kept going. The weird part was, for the next mile or so, I had this sensation that someone was behind me. I didn't hear footsteps, just that heavy, almost electric awareness that you're not alone. Every so often I'd glance back. Nothing. Then I reached a fork, where a narrow side trail cuts down toward the creek. I stopped there to drink some water, and while I was unscrewing the cap, I heard a voice from somewhere off to my right say, "You're going the wrong way." I spun around, but the trees were dense and snow-muted. I didn't see anyone. It didn't even sound like it had come from the trail, more like from deeper in the woods. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing, just the wind moving through the branches. I took the main trail and walked faster, telling myself it was probably another hiker messing with me. But it didn't feel like that. Another mile and a half in, I reached the overlook where I'd planned to turn around. The view was incredible, the frozen creek winding through snow-covered trees, but I couldn't shake how uneasy I felt. I kept glancing at the tree line on both sides, scanning for movement. That's when I saw him again. He was standing on the far side of the creek, maybe 100 yards away, just beyond the ice. Same clothes, same posture. There were no bridges nearby, no obvious way he could have gotten there in the time since I'd passed him. I stared for a good 30 seconds, trying to make sense of it. He didn't move. Finally, I turned to head back. I figured if I started hiking now, I could get to my car before it got dark. The trail felt different going back. Quieter, like even the normal forest sounds had pulled away. At one point, I heard crunching snow behind me, but when I stopped, it stopped too. I waited, listening, but the sound didn't come again. About halfway back to the trailhead, there's a sharp bend where you can see a long stretch of the path behind you. As I rounded it, I looked back, and there he was, maybe 50 yards away. Walking now. Not fast, but steady. I turned forward and kept moving, forcing myself not to break into a run. Every minute or so, I'd glance over my shoulder. He was still there. Always the same distance behind. Always walking. When I finally reached the parking lot, my car was the only one there. I unlocked it, got in, and started it immediately. I looked once more toward the trail. He wasn't there. I pulled out onto the road and drove about a quarter mile before curiosity got the better of me. There's a spot where the road curves and you can see the trailhead through the trees. I slowed down and looked. He was standing at the edge of the lot, facing the road, still in that same posture, arms loose at his sides. I didn't stop again. When I got home, I checked the weather for that day, just to confirm. The high had been 27 degrees. I was flying home from a work trip to Denver. It was one of those weird midweek flights with a long layover in Salt Lake City. My connection wasn't until late evening, and when I got to the concourse, the place was almost empty. Most of the gates were dark, the display screens either blank or looping ads. I picked a seat in the middle of a quiet row near the windows. The carpet smelled faintly like disinfectant, and the only sound was the distant beeping of one of those electric carts they use to ferry people around. A few minutes after I sat down, I noticed someone walking down the concourse toward me. A man, maybe late 30s, early 40s, wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit, crisp white shirt, dark tie, polished shoes. He didn't have any luggage, no roller bag, no backpack, not even a phone in his hand. He sat down one seat away from me, not directly next to me, but close enough that it felt intentional. "Where you headed?" he asked, looking straight ahead toward the darkened gate area. His voice was even and calm, almost rehearsed. "Seattle," I said. "You?" "Connecting," he said. "In a bit." I glanced at the gate sign we were sitting by. The screen above it was off, no destination listed. The desk behind the counter was empty. The only movement was the slow spin of the baggage carousel visible through the window on the far side. We made small talk for a minute or two, weather in Denver, the usual travel annoyances. I noticed his suit had no wrinkles at all, like it had just come off a hanger. His hair was neatly parted, not a strand out of place. At some point, I turned away to grab my water bottle from my bag. It was just a second or two. When I looked back, he was gone. Not walking away, not down the hall, just gone. The seat beside me was empty, and the entire stretch of concourse in both directions was clear. You could see a good 50 yards each way, and there was no sign of him. I thought maybe he'd ducked into the bathroom across the hall, but the door was in my line of sight. No one had gone in or out. That's when I realized the gate he'd been waiting at wasn't just dark. The whole area looked unused. The boarding lane stanchions were pushed to the side, the podium unplugged. There wasn't even a stack of those plastic bin tags they use for carry-ons. I sat there for another few minutes, scanning for him. Nothing. Eventually, I got up and walked over to check the gate number, C14. I didn't think much of it until I boarded my actual flight an hour later and happened to glance at my next trip's itinerary in my email. One I'd booked weeks before for a family visit in early March. The departure gate printed on that boarding pass, C1. 2 weeks from now, same airport, same terminal. I didn't mention it to anyone. When I landed in Seattle, I even checked again, thinking maybe I'd remembered wrong, but the itinerary was the same. Gate C-14. I still don't know what flight he was supposedly waiting for that night, because the screens never turned on and no one ever came to that desk. I was wandering through the weekend flea market just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. One of those gray late November days where the sky was low and the air had that damp chill that seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. It wasn't raining, but everything felt like it might start at any moment, so the crowd was thinner than usual. Mostly locals, a few tourists like me looking for something interesting or cheap. I was there mostly to kill time. I don't usually dig through flea markets, but I figured why not? There's something about old things that catches my attention. Stuff that's been around longer than me, held by people I'll never know. I kept weaving between stalls, the smell of fried dough and coffee in the air, when I noticed this small booth tucked away near the back. It was kind of out of place, more organized and neat compared to the usual cluttered tables piled with rusty tools, faded postcards, and broken trinkets. Behind the table sat an old man. He looked like he could have been born around the same time as the pocket watches he was selling. Thin white hair combed straight back, pale skin with age spots and deep-set eyes that caught the light but didn't reflect much else. He wore a simple brown cardigan, buttoned all the way up, even though it wasn't cold enough for that, not quite yet. On the table in front of him were about a dozen pocket watches, all laid out on a velvet cloth. The watches were all different shapes and sizes, some brass, some silver, some gold-toned, some plain. But what really caught my eye was how all of them were ticking in perfect sync. The same rhythm, not just close, but exactly the same beat. Tick, 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 in unison. I reached out to tap one lightly, and the rest seemed to respond, like they were connected somehow. I'm not much of a watch guy. I've never cared about collecting or fixing them, but this was strange enough to pull me in. I looked up at the man, and he smiled gently with a kind of tired patience. "They all tick the same," I said, holding up one watch. "How does that work? They're all different brands." He nodded slowly. "Yes, different times, different makers, but they're all set to the same place." His voice was calm, steady, with no hint of a joke. "Same place." I blinked, not sure what he meant. "What place?" He shrugged a little and smiled that same soft smile, but he didn't explain. I looked back down at the watches. The second hand on every one was frozen at the exact same spot. The minute and hour hands all pointed to 3:16. The ticking I'd been hearing wasn't a normal tick of a watch. It was almost like a heartbeat, steady and deep. I asked him where he got them. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached under the table and pulled out a small, faded photograph. It was black and white, grainy, showing a group of men standing in front of what looked like an old factory or warehouse. One man stood a little apart from the others, holding a pocket watch up to the camera. The photo was worn, edges frayed, but the man's face was clear. He looked a lot like the vendor himself. "They're all set to the same place," he repeated, almost to himself. "Time, it's funny, isn't it? Sometimes it stops, sometimes it moves, but it's all still the same place, no matter how it looks." I didn't know how to respond, so I asked if he could fix watches. He said he could, but he preferred to sell them. "Fixing time is a bit more complicated," he added with a wink. That felt like a joke, but it didn't land quite right. Something about the way he said it was off. The way he held his hands as he spoke, they looked human enough, but moved with a kind of stiffness, like he was used to acting natural, but never quite pulled it off. I glanced around the booth, suddenly aware of how quiet it was back there. No other vendors near us. The rain had started, just a light sprinkle, but the sky was growing darker by the minute. "Do you ever get strange customers?" I asked, partly to fill the silence. He looked up and met my eyes, those pale, almost too clear eyes. "Strange is relative. I've seen many things, and not all of them make sense." He paused, then tapped one of the watches. "They're all keeping time together. That's what matters." I nodded slowly, feeling a little unnerved, but not quite ready to leave. I asked if the watches ever stopped. "Sometimes they do," he said, "but they always start again." I was about to ask more when a sharp chill ran down my neck. I glanced around and noticed that While the rain was still gentle outside, the air in that booth felt suddenly colder. The vendor didn't seem to notice. I asked what time it was. He glanced up at a cracked wall clock behind him, then said, 3:16. I thought I heard a faint echo in his voice, like he was reading from memory. Then I realized the watches on the table were still all pointing exactly to 3:16. That's when the uneasiness really started creeping in. I started to ask if he ever felt out of place, but he interrupted me. Sometimes I wonder where time really goes when it leaves us, but that's a question for another day. I smiled weakly and said I should get going. The rain was picking up, and I wanted to beat the storm. He nodded and wrapped one of the watches carefully in a small velvet pouch, saying it was a gift. I hesitated, but took it anyway. Outside, the air was heavy with damp earth and rain. The market had started closing down. I slipped the watch into my pocket and started walking back toward my car, glancing back once at the booth. The old man was gone. The spot where he'd been sitting was empty, the velvet cloth folded neatly on the table, but no sign he'd ever been there. That was weeks ago. The watch still ticks, always in rhythm, always on 3:16. Sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I can hear other watches ticking, just faint enough to hear if I listen hard. But no matter what, they never change time. I wasn't planning on going to the party. I work with this guy, Matt Sanders, at a small marketing firm in Portland, and when he invited me over for this casual get-together at his place, I thought about skipping it. It was a Friday night, and honestly, I was tired. But I figured, why not? Maybe it'd be a chance to meet some new people outside the office. The party was small, just a handful of coworkers and some of their friends. Matt's apartment was on the third floor of an old brick building in southeast Portland. It had that kind of warm, lived-in feel, with mismatched furniture and plants all over. The kind of place where you feel like you could settle in for a quiet night. The weather outside was chilly, typical early November rain, but inside the place smelled faintly of cedar and something sweet like cinnamon or vanilla. I was standing near the kitchen, nursing a beer, when a guy came up to me. He was maybe mid-30s, clean-cut, dressed in a plain gray sweater and dark jeans. He looked kind of familiar, but not someone I'd ever met before. He smiled and said, "Hey, you must be Rachel Lynn Peterson." I blinked. That's my full name, middle name and all. I hadn't even introduced myself properly to anyone, and here he was, saying the exact name I always try to keep to myself in casual settings. "Yeah, that's me," I said cautiously, trying to place him. "Do we know each other?" He shook his head, still smiling like he already knew the answer. "No, we haven't met. I'm Mark. I'm a friend of Matt's." Matt was nowhere near us at the moment, so I figured he was telling the truth. But there was something about the way Mark said my name. It wasn't just the formal way he said it, like someone reading off a list. It was like he'd said it before, several times. Perfectly. Before I could ask why he knew my full name, Mark did something that really threw me off. He asked, "How have you been dealing with that accident you had when you were 7? The one at the lake?" I froze. The accident. I hadn't told anyone about that. Not coworkers, not friends, not even family outside of my parents and sister. I always kept it locked away because it was messy and weird and something I didn't like to talk about. There was no reason for anyone at this party to know. "I'm sorry." "What?" I said, hoping maybe I misheard. Mark's smile didn't falter. "You know, the day you fell through the ice at Silver Creek, your mom almost lost you. That was pretty serious." I blinked hard, trying to make sense of it. "That was years ago, and, no one here knows about that." He nodded like it was obvious. "Of course, but Matt mentioned it once, and I happened to remember." I glanced over at Matt, who was talking with a couple of other people, looking completely normal. He didn't seem to notice anything strange. "Matt told you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark shrugged. "Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Doesn't matter much." Then, almost casually, he added, "It's a miracle you're still here." The room felt suddenly colder. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself this guy was just weirdly nosy. But the way he looked at me, with those calm, steady eyes that didn't quite blink like a normal person, made my skin crawl. I changed the subject quickly. "So how do you know Matt?" He smiled, but it was different now, like something rehearsed. "Oh, we've known each other a long time. He's a good friend." I nodded, but I could feel the weight of the conversation settling in my chest. I kept glancing back at Mark throughout the night. Every time I caught his eye, he seemed to be studying me, like trying to see something deeper. Later, when I stepped outside for some fresh air, I realized the rain had stopped, but the streetlights cast long shadows on the wet pavement. I stood there for a few minutes trying to clear my head. When I went back inside, Mark was gone. I asked Matt where he'd gone, and Matt just shrugged like he didn't know anyone by that name. The next day at work, I brought it up casually to Matt. "Hey, who was that guy at your party? Mark something?" Matt looked confused. "Mark? I don't think I invited anyone named Mark. Are you sure?" I described him down to the gray sweater and the way he smiled, but Matt said no one matching that description had been there. I checked with a few coworkers. No one remembered a Mark. I started doubting myself, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. But the way Mark said my full name, the way he knew about the accident, no one else mentioned, it felt too specific to be coincidence. The strangest part? A few days later, I found a voicemail on my phone. It was just static, but underneath it, I thought I heard a faint voice saying my full name, Rachel Lynn Peterson, over and over, slow and deliberate. I called Matt, but he didn't pick up. No one did. That night, I kept checking my phone, waiting for another call or message. But there was nothing else, just silence. I don't know who that guy was, or how he knew things about me I never told anyone. Sometimes I wonder if I was just tired and imagining things, but the watch on my wrist ticked the same way the old clocks at that flea market did, steady and unchanging, and that feeling of being watched didn't leave me for days. Maybe some things are just too quiet to explain. I was at the grocery store just after 6 in the evening, the kind of dull weekday trip where you just want to grab a few things and get home. The sky outside was overcast, that low gray you get in Seattle in early March, and the air inside the store smelled like bleach and cold vegetables. I wasn't really paying attention to much, just trying to get my usual stuff, some milk, bread, eggs, nothing special. I turned down the cereal aisle and noticed a little girl standing maybe 10 feet away by the cans of soup. She was probably about 6 or 7, wearing a bright yellow raincoat with the hood up, even though it wasn't raining inside. She didn't say anything or move from where she stood. I caught her eyes, and she was just staring at me, silently, like she was waiting for something. I blinked and looked away, figuring maybe she was lost or just curious about something else. I reached for a box of cereal and glanced back. She was still there, still watching. Then I moved a step to the left, and that's when it got weird. She stepped to the left, exactly like me. I stopped. She stopped. I took 2 steps back. She took 2 steps back. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But it wasn't. So I decided to test it, just to be sure I wasn't imagining things. I made a sudden, exaggerated step forward, like I was going to rush past her. She did the same, mirroring my move perfectly. That's when I felt a little spike of panic. Not the kind where you want to run, but the kind where your skin prickles and your mouth dries up. I glanced around the aisle, half expecting someone to notice or do something. No one did. I tried to look at her face for any hint of a smile or a joke, but it was blank. Her eyes were too steady, too calm, like she wasn't a kid at all, but something else pretending. I kept moving in slow, awkward steps, and she followed exactly, matching every movement. I even tried a quick pivot, spinning almost, and she did the same without hesitation. It was like watching my reflection in a mirror that wasn't made of glass. I looked at her coat again. The yellow was almost too bright, almost glowing under the fluorescent lights. Her hood covered most of her hair, but I thought I saw something that didn't look quite right, like her skin was too smooth, almost plastic. But every time I blinked, it was normal again. I was about to say something when a woman's voice came from behind me. "Are you okay?" I turned and saw a cashier near the end of the aisle, an older woman with kind eyes and a name tag that said Joan. I gave a quick nod and tried to smile. "Yeah, just a little distracted," I said. Joan looked toward the girl. "That's Claire. She's a bit shy, doesn't talk much. You're okay, right?" "Yeah, she's just standing there," I said, still uneasy. Joan smiled, but there was something off in the way she looked at me, like she was watching me more than just observing. She likes to watch people, quiet like that. Don't mind her." I nodded, but the feeling didn't go away. I tried to move past the girl, but she moved to keep pace like she was glued to me. When I slowed, she slowed. When I looked away, she kept her eyes on me. I ended up abandoning the aisle and heading to the checkout line, hoping to lose her in the crowd. But as I waited, I saw her again, standing just outside the produce section, still watching. I told the cashier, Joan, I had to get going. Outside, the rain had started, light and steady. I pulled up my hood and started walking to my car in the parking lot. I glanced back once more. The girl was standing just by the entrance, but now she was alone. No one else was near her. I got in my car and locked the doors. On the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her following at the next stoplight or lurking near my house. Nothing. At home, I told my roommate about it, and she just laughed, saying maybe the girl was bored or had a weird sense of humor. But I didn't laugh. A few nights later, I was lying in bed when I heard the faint sound of footsteps outside my window. I looked, but there was no one there, just the empty street and the glow from a street lamp. The next morning, I found a single yellow raincoat hanging on the fence outside my house. I never saw Claire again. I was at the rest stop off Highway 95, about 50 miles south of Reno. It was late September, just after dusk, and the air had that dry, slightly chilly edge you get when fall sneaks into the desert. I'd been driving all afternoon, trying to make it back home before night fully set in. The sun had disappeared behind the hills, leaving this fading orange-pink glow that vanished fast. I pulled into the rest stop because I needed a break. Not just to pee, but to shake off the tension I'd been feeling all day. The kind of tension that sneaks up on you when you're alone on long stretches of highway and your thoughts start drifting in circles. I didn't expect anything strange. Just a quick stop, use the restroom, grab a coffee from the vending machine, and then back on the road. The restroom itself was nearly empty, a little grimy, like most highway restrooms, but functional enough. I went inside and found the sinks along one wall. That's when I noticed him. There was a man standing at the far end, washing his hands. Nothing odd about that, except he was standing there longer than usual, like way longer. Maybe a minute or two, which is kind of weird for washing hands. He wasn't scrubbing or drying off. He was just holding his hands under the faucet, staring into the mirror above the sink. I was halfway done washing my hands when I glanced over at him. His eyes met mine for a second. He smiled, a faint, tight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something about it that made my stomach twist a little, like the smile was out of place. But I said nothing. Didn't want to make a scene. I dried my hands and started to leave, but as I moved toward the door, I noticed something strange. I didn't hear the water turn off behind me. Usually when someone finishes washing their hands, the faucet stops running. But this guy just stood there, water flowing steadily. I turned back briefly, still at the sink, hands under the stream, smiling into the mirror. I gave him a nod and left without saying a word. Outside, I lit a cigarette and stared down the highway. The road was empty, except for the occasional flicker of distant headlights. The sky was deepening to a navy blue, and the first stars were starting to show. I kept thinking about the guy inside. Something was off about him. Not just the smile or how long he washed his hands, but the way he looked at me. And not just me, but at himself in the mirror. Like he was trying to see something there that I couldn't. I finished my smoke and got back into the car, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked around the rest stop parking lot. No one else was there. The next day, I was at work, trying to push it out of my head. But that night, when I was alone in my apartment, I started remembering small details I hadn't noticed before. For one, the guy's clothes were oddly clean and new. Not like he'd just come off a road trip or anything. It was like he stepped out of a store. He had this almost generic look. Brown hair, average height, no tattoos or scars, nothing really standing out. But his eyes, those eyes were sharp and oddly calm, like he wasn't just a man standing in a restroom, but something else pretending. A few nights later, I was back on the highway and I stopped at the same rest stop. This time I was a little early, just after sunset, and the place was even emptier. I went inside and checked the sinks. No one was there. I washed my hands quickly and went out, but on the way back to the car, I caught a glimpse of movement near the far edge of the parking lot. Someone was standing behind the dumpsters, too far away to make out a face, but their posture was still and deliberate. I kept my eyes on them until they disappeared around the corner of the building. After that, I started noticing weird little things around town. Shadows where they shouldn't be, lights that flickered when I walked by, the occasional feeling of being watched from a distance. One afternoon, I saw a man in a coffee shop who looked almost exactly like the guy from the restroom. He sat alone, staring out the window, and when our eyes met, he gave me the same faint, knowing smile. I blinked, and he was gone. I tried telling some friends, but they laughed it off, said I was tired or imagining things. Maybe I was. But the thing that bothers me most is that the last time I went to that rest stop, the faucet where he stood was broken. It wouldn't turn on at all. So how was he washing his hands for so long? I met Darren at the bar around 9 that Saturday night. I don't usually talk to strangers, but the place was almost empty except for a couple of regulars and him sitting alone at the end of the counter. He looked like one of those guys who just moved into town, clean cut but with an edge of nervousness. I was nursing a beer after work, and he struck up a conversation about the weather, the usual small talk that somehow felt easy that night. After a while, we ended up deciding to walk somewhere quieter. He said his place was close by, and I figured a walk would clear my head. The night was clear and cool, the kind of crisp fall air that smells like wet leaves and wood smoke. The streets were mostly empty, just the soft hum of distant cars and the occasional bark of a dog. We walked side by side, Darren talking about odd little things, how the town felt off in a way he couldn't explain. I laughed it off, but there was something odd about the way he looked at the streetlights, like they weren't quite right or didn't belong. About 10 minutes into the walk, he stopped suddenly and tilted his head up toward the sky. "It's smaller here," he said softly, as if talking to himself more than me. I glanced up, assuming he meant the moon, but the moon looked normal to me, full, bright, the usual pale yellow hanging low over the rooftops. "Smaller?" I asked. He nodded, still looking up with this strange, peaceful smile. "Yeah, like compressed, tighter." I frowned, feeling a bit weirded out. "What do you mean?" He shrugged and started walking again. "You'll see, I guess." We passed a streetlight, and I noticed the light seemed dimmer than usual, almost as if the bulb was fading, but it wasn't flickering, just steady but low. Darren glanced at it, and I caught a glimpse of his face, like relief. "I don't know why," he said quietly, but this place feels different, smaller. That stuck with me. The rest of the walk, I kept noticing little things. Shadows that looked just a bit too sharp. Sounds that stopped abruptly when I turned my head. Once, I thought I heard footsteps behind us, but when I looked back, there was nothing but empty sidewalk and dark windows. Darren didn't seem bothered by any of it. He was calm, almost like he was expecting it. We got to his street, a narrow road lined with old trees and a few houses, most with lights off. "Here," he said, pointing to a small porch light. "I'm just a few houses down." I nodded, about to say goodbye, when I noticed something odd. The street sign across from us said Maplewood, but the letters were too clear, like they'd been freshly painted. The sign itself looked newer than I remembered from the last time I'd been this way. "Have you lived here long?" I asked. He looked at me like I'd asked if the sky was blue. "Not really, not exactly." That was the last thing he said before turning toward a house that looked just a little too perfect. The lawn was flawless, the porch light glowing steady, and the windows were spotless. I felt a sudden cold prick of unease. "I'm going to head home," I said, stepping back. Darren smiled again, the same calm, almost knowing smile, and nodded. "Safe travels." I walked away, but after a few steps, I turned back, half expecting him to call out or wave. He wasn't there. I blinked, scanning the street, but the porch was empty. The light still glowed, but no sign of him. I was sure he'd just gone inside. But when I checked the windows, the curtains were tightly closed. I started walking again, faster this time, heading toward the busier part of town. On the way, I kept glancing at the sky. The moon hung there, still normal, full and bright, but something about the whole scene felt compressed. Smaller, like Darren said, Like the space around me had shrunk just a bit, making everything feel too close, too contained. When I finally got home, I locked the door behind me and sat down on the couch, trying to shake the feeling. I thought about Darren and the way he talked about the place like it was some kind of pocket, a smaller version of the world. I tried to tell myself it was just the night, the empty streets, and my imagination. But later, when I looked out the window, the moon seemed just a little too distant, a little too cold, and maybe, just maybe, a little too small. I was driving back from a weekend camping trip in the Sierra Nevada. It was late October, the air crisp but clear, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible in the early morning but fades quickly once the sun's up. I left my campsite before dawn to get an early start on the road, and about an hour into the drive, I decided to stop at this overlook I'd passed a few times but never really checked out. The overlook was just off a winding mountain road, a small gravel pullout with a few picnic tables and a view that stretched over a dense forest of pines and firs. The sun was still low, casting long shadows over the valley below. There was barely anyone there, just me and the quiet morning. I grabbed my phone and stepped out of the car, stretching my legs. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. As I was walking around the edge of the overlook, I noticed an older couple sitting on a bench near the guardrail. They looked to be in their late 70s or early 80s, both wearing heavy jackets, the kind you get at those tourist shops that say the name of the town in big letters. The man had a gray beard and wire-rimmed glasses. The woman wore a knitted hat pulled low over her ears. They caught my eye and smiled. The man waved and asked if I could take their picture. I was surprised, since the spot wasn't crowded, but of course I said yes. They stood up and moved closer together, the woman resting her head lightly on the man's shoulder. I pulled out my phone, held it up, and snapped the photo. I figured I'd check it right away. Sometimes the light in these early mornings can mess with the camera. That's when things started to feel off. I looked down at my phone, tapping the screen to open the photo. The image popped up, but the couple wasn't in it. Not even a blur or shadow, nothing at all where they had been standing a second ago. The bench and the trees behind it were clear, but the two of them just weren't there. My first thought was maybe the camera glitched, so I took another picture of the same spot. This time, the bench was empty, and again, no sign of them anywhere in the frame. I looked back up at the overlook. The couple was gone. I scanned the area around the bench, then farther out along the hilltop, but there was no sign of them. No footprints or anything in the gravel, no cars parked nearby besides mine. No voices, no movement. I stood there for a minute, confused, half expecting them to come out from behind a tree or something, maybe playing a trick. But nothing. I shook my head and sat down on the bench, trying to convince myself maybe I just didn't see where they went. Maybe they left quietly while I was fumbling with my phone. Then I noticed the air had changed. It wasn't just the cool mountain breeze anymore. There was something else, an almost imperceptible weight, like the atmosphere was thicker, harder to breathe. I stared out at the valley, but the trees looked different, somehow off, not because of the light, but something subtle I couldn't put my finger on. After a few minutes, I got back in the car and started driving again. But the feeling stuck with me. It was like the hilltop had absorbed something I wasn't meant to see. That afternoon, when I got back home, I went through the photos on my phone again. The rest of the trip pictures were normal. Friends around the campfire, my tent, the river. But that one from the overlook kept nagging at me. The spot was clear and the bench was empty, just like when I looked up after taking the picture. A few days later, I mentioned it to my sister over dinner. She just laughed and said maybe the couple were ghosts or something. I didn't say much. Since then, I've gone back to that overlook a couple of times, hoping to see something, anything that might explain what happened. But every time, it's just me and the quiet. No sign of the couple or anything unusual, except that same heavy feeling in the air like the place remembers more than it lets on. I don't know what they were doing there or why they disappeared so completely. The photo is still on my phone, plain and unaltered, except for the missing figures. Sometimes I wonder if I actually saw them at all, or if it was just my mind playing tricks. But the weight in the air at that overlook tells me otherwise. I was driving back home from a long weekend at my sister's place in Vermont. The kind of quiet fall afternoon where the sun's low, but it's not quite dusk yet. The roads were slick from an early rain, and the air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke. I decided to stop at a little roadside diner I'd never been to before. Nothing fancy, just the kind of place that looks like it's been there since the 50s, with a faded sign and vinyl booths. Inside, there were only a few customers scattered around, and the whole place had that low hum of chatter and clinking dishes. I grabbed a booth near the window and ordered coffee and a slice of apple pie. As I waited, an older woman came in by herself. She looked about 70, maybe older, with thin white hair pulled back in a bun and eyes that seemed too sharp for her age. She sat down at the booth next to me and smiled like she knew me, but I didn't recognize her. After a minute, she spoke in this soft, slightly shaky voice. "Excuse me, dear, could you help me with something?" I nodded, not really sure what she meant. She pulled a folded photograph from her purse and handed it to me. "This is from a family picnic years ago," she said. "My family used to come here often." I unfolded the photo carefully. It was faded, the kind of yellowed black and white print you'd find in an old scrapbook. In the foreground, a small group of people sat on a blanket under some big oak trees. I figured they were her family, but what caught my attention was something in the background. Off to the right, near the tree line, a figure was standing alone. What made me freeze was that the figure was wearing exactly what I had on that day. My jeans, my dark green jacket, and even the light blue shirt I'd only bought the week before on a whim. I stared back at the woman, confused. "How is this possible?" I asked, holding the photo up to her. She smiled faintly, almost sadly. "That's the part I don't understand. I don't know who that is, but I remember the day well. It was probably 15 years ago. This photo was taken back then." I looked down at myself, then back at the photo. The jacket, the shirt, the jeans, everything matched perfectly. There was no way that was me in the picture. I hadn't even owned these clothes until last week. "Are you sure this is from years ago?" I said, feeling a little off balance. "Absolutely," she replied. "I've kept this photo for decades. That person standing there wasn't in my family. We never could figure out who it was." I glanced back at the figure in the trees. The person's face was blurry, too distant to make out, but the posture was oddly stiff, almost like a mannequin. It was weirdly out of place among the casual, smiling family members. I handed the photo back to her and said, "It's strange. I don't know what to say." She nodded, tucking it away again. "Maybe it means something, or maybe it doesn't. But sometimes things don't add up the way we expect." After that, we talked a little more about the diner and the town. She seemed content to sit quietly afterward, watching the rain start again outside the window. I left feeling more unsettled than anything else. Driving the rest of the way home, I kept thinking about that photo. How could someone be wearing my clothes so long ago? It wasn't like I'd picked up a vintage jacket or anything. It was brand new when I bought it. The next few days were weird. I started noticing people on the street who seemed vaguely familiar, but when I looked again, there was nothing there. I heard footsteps behind me when no one was around. Lights outside my apartment flickered for a few seconds at odd hours. One night, I went for a walk around the neighborhood, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The streets were empty, and the moon was low behind thin clouds. As I walked past a small park, I thought I caught a glimpse of someone standing just beyond the tree line, tall, still, and wearing a green jacket. I blinked, and they were gone. I don't know what it all means. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe there's something I'm missing. But that photo sticks with me, like a reminder that something about this world isn't quite right, and maybe never will be. I met her at a party, one of those casual get-togethers that my friend Ellie throws every few months at her apartment in Seattle. It was a Saturday evening in early October, damp and cool outside, with the kind of steady drizzle that makes the city feel like it's wrapped in gray velvet. I didn't know many people there, mostly friends of friends, so I stuck close to the edges of the living room, nursing a beer and trying not to look like I was counting down the minutes. That's when I noticed her. She wasn't standing in any particular group, just by herself near the kitchen, looking around like she wasn't sure where to go next. She was maybe my age, mid-30s, with short dark hair and eyes that were too steady, like she was studying everything carefully. I don't know what made me walk over, but I did. "Hi, I'm Mark," I said, holding out my hand. She smiled, and it was a small, careful smile. "Claire," she said. We started talking, mostly about usual things, how we knew Ellie, what kind of work we did, the usual party stuff, but there was something about her voice. It was soft but clear, and it had this strange quality that I couldn't shake. It sounded exactly like someone I knew, someone I hadn't thought about in a long time. Her voice was the same as Jamie's. Jamie was my closest friend in college. We were inseparable for years, and then he died suddenly in a car accident about 6 years ago. The last few years have been hard, but I thought I had come to terms with it. Hearing that voice again was like stepping into a fog. It was familiar, but out of place. I wanted to ask if she was from somewhere else or if she just had a voice like Jamie's, but the words never came. Instead, we talked about music, movies, and the weird weather Seattle was having lately. I kept sneaking glances at her, trying to find something in her face that would explain the voice. But there was nothing, just a calm, almost blank expression that didn't quite fit with the rest of her. The party went on around us, but it felt like time slowed down whenever she spoke. I remember thinking how strange it was that Ellie hadn't introduced us yet, but the apartment was crowded, and she was busy catching up with other friends. At one point, Claire excused herself to get another drink, and I stayed by the kitchen, trying to figure out if I should say something. Before I could, Ellie came up behind me. "Oh, that's Claire. She just moved here from Portland. You two should hang out more," Ellie said, smiling like she thought this was normal. I nodded, but my mind was spinning. Portland wasn't far, but I'd never heard Jamie's voice outside of memories and old recordings. Something didn't add up. After the party, I tried to forget about it, but that voice haunted me. I kept hearing it in my head, like a recording stuck on loop. The way she said certain words, the little pauses, even the way she laughed, it was all Jamie. But Claire wasn't Jamie. Over the next few days, I looked for Claire on social media, but there was almost nothing. No posts, no photos, no mutual friends, except Ellie. When I asked Ellie about her, she said Claire was quiet, kept to herself, and didn't talk much about her past. One evening, I decided to call Ellie. I wanted to know more about Claire, to figure out if she was real or some trick my mind was playing. "Yeah, Claire's fine," Ellie said. "She's a bit weird, I guess. Keeps to herself mostly." I told her about the voice, trying to sound casual. "Oh, you mean like Jamie's? That's weird. I never thought about it before." We laughed it off, but I wasn't convinced. Then, a few nights later, I ran into Claire again at a coffee shop near my apartment. It was late, and the place was nearly empty, except for a couple of people typing away on laptops. Claire was sitting alone, sipping a black coffee and staring out the window. I hesitated but sat down across from her. We talked quietly, this time more about life and loss. Not everything, but enough to explain why her voice was so unsettling. She listened without interrupting, then said, "I know loss changes the way we hear things. Sometimes voices come back when we least expect." Her words were simple, but her eyes held something deeper, something I couldn't place. I wanted to ask more, where she was really from, why she sounded like Jamie, but something stopped me. Maybe it was respect, or maybe it was the feeling that some questions didn't have answers. On the way home that night, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see her following me. But she wasn't, just the empty streets slick with rain. After that, I didn't see Claire again. I asked Ellie, who said Claire had moved out of town for a while, something about work. I kept thinking about her voice, how it was the same but not quite right, how hearing it shook something loose inside me, made me question what I thought I knew about memory and reality. It's strange how certain sounds or faces can pull you back into places you thought you'd left behind. Claire's voice was like that, a ghost I couldn't ignore even when I wanted to. I still wonder sometimes if I imagined it all, or if there's something about her that wasn't quite human. Something that looked and sounded right, but wasn't. Whatever it was, it stayed with me longer than I expected. I was working the late shift at the little bookstore I manage in a small town near the coast, Moss Bay, if you've heard of it. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and things move at a slower pace than the city. On this particular night, it was drizzling steadily, that cold, salty mist coming off the ocean mixing with the streetlight's glow. I was tired, ready to close up soon, and mostly just waiting for the last customer to leave. Around 10 minutes before closing, the door chimed and a man walked in. Nothing unusual so far, except he looked out of place. He wore a plain beige coat buttoned all the way up like he was trying to keep warm against the damp air. But what really caught me off guard was his expression. His face was calm but blank, like he was thinking hard about something. And his eyes didn't quite match his age. Hard to explain. There was this subtle oddness in the way he looked at me, like he was trying to figure me out but also hiding something. He walked slowly to the counter and asked in a quiet voice, "What year is it?" I blinked, a little taken aback. I wasn't sure I'd heard him right, so I just said, "It's 2023. His eyes shifted, and for a moment relief washed over his face. He nodded slowly like I just told him something important, something he really needed to hear. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. No purchase, no further questions, just the bell on the door jingling behind him. I stood there for a minute, trying to shake off the weird feeling that settled in my gut. I checked the clock, 9:50 p.m. Closing time was always quiet, but this guy was strange. There was something about the way he moved, like he wasn't quite comfortable being here, or maybe anywhere. I locked the door and started shutting down the registers. The rain was heavier now, tapping against the windows with that steady rhythm that makes you want to just sit still and listen. But my mind kept drifting back to that man's question. What year is it? Why would someone ask that in the middle of a bookstore in a town that barely changes from one year to the next? The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I asked around if anyone else had seen him, but no one did. It was like he'd appeared out of nowhere, asked that one question, and disappeared again. I told my sister about it when I called her that afternoon, and she joked that maybe he was some kind of time traveler or something. I laughed, but the idea didn't feel totally impossible. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a faint tapping on my apartment window. I live on the second floor, so I was surprised. I looked outside, but didn't see anyone. Just the wet street and the flicker of a streetlight. The tapping came again, soft and deliberate. I thought maybe it was a branch swaying in the wind, but the pattern seemed too regular. I stepped closer and caught a glimpse of a shadow just beyond the glass. When I turned on the light, nothing was there. For the next few days, little things started piling up. My phone battery drained faster than usual. I found my keys in the fridge one morning. I kept thinking I heard footsteps behind me when no one was there. Sometimes, when I looked out the window at night, I'd catch a glimpse of someone standing under a street lamp across the street. Always just standing, never moving. One evening, I was locking up the bookstore again, the streets empty and soaked from rain. The air felt thick, like something was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Suddenly, the door chimed, and there he was, the man in the beige coat. Same calm face, same quiet eyes. He didn't say anything this time. He just stood there, looking around the shop like he was seeing it for the first time. Then he turned to me and said, "Is everything as you remember?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked at me like he was struggling to find the right words. "Do you feel like time is right?" I wanted to ask more, but before I could, he nodded at the clock and said, "You're running out of time." Then he left again, disappearing into the wet night. That phrase stuck with me. Running out of time. It didn't make sense, but it felt urgent, like a warning. After that night, I tried to keep my routine normal. But sometimes, when I caught my reflection in the window, I thought I saw a flicker of something else in my eyes. And sometimes, late at night, I could swear I heard footsteps on the stairs outside my apartment. I never saw the man in the beige coat again. But sometimes, when the rain is just right and the streetlights blur through the mist, I swear I can feel him watching. I was waiting for the bus on a Tuesday evening, about an hour before sunset. It was early April in Portland, so the sky was this dull gray, heavy with clouds but no rain yet. The air smelled faintly like wet pavement and melting snow from the weekend. I had just finished a long day at the bookstore and was eager to get home. The bus stop I usually used is kind of tucked between an old coffee shop and a small park, so it's quiet most evenings, especially this time of year. There was one other person there when I got to the stop, a guy who looked maybe in his mid-30s, dressed pretty plainly in a black jacket and jeans. He had dark hair, nothing special, and was standing close to the edge of the sidewalk. When I arrived, he gave me a quick nod, but didn't say anything right away. I found it a little odd that he didn't have a phone or a book or anything to pass the time. After a few minutes, he turned and said, "Looks like we're in for some rain soon, typical Portland spring." I smiled, not expecting conversation, but happy to have someone to talk to. "Yeah, could start any minute now. Feels like it's been hanging over us all day." He nodded and looked up at the sky. "I like it, though. The way the clouds move, the cool air, it's calming." That's when I noticed his eyes, or more specifically, his blinking. It was the most unnatural thing I'd ever seen. He blinked 5 or 6 times in rapid succession, like a machine counting off beats, and then stopped blinking altogether for what felt like a full minute. I tried not to stare, but it kept happening. Rapid blinks, then long stretches with no blinking at all. When I looked away and back, the pattern was the same. It was rhythmic, almost like he was sending some kind of silent message, but with his eyes. I got kind of nervous. It's weird when something about a person just feels wrong, even if they look normal. I thought maybe he had a nervous tic or some sort of eye condition, but it was too precise, too mechanical. Trying to keep things casual, I asked, "Do your eyes ever get dry? I mean, you don't blink much." He smiled. Again, not quite right, like he was forcing it, and said, "I don't need to blink as much as you. It's different for me." His voice was steady, maybe a little too calm, like he was used to explaining things no one else would understand. The bus hadn't come yet, and I was starting to feel uncomfortable just standing there with him. The silence between blinks was heavy. I noticed he wasn't really looking at anything in particular, more like his gaze was fixed just beyond me, somewhere far away, but still watching. I asked, "So do you live around here?" "Nearby," he said vaguely. "I like to come here. The waiting is peaceful." It was strange. Most people either complain about the bus taking forever or pull out their phone or fidget. He just stood there, perfectly still except for that blinking. A few more minutes passed. The sun dipped lower, and the first drops of rain started falling. Soft at first, then steady. The other guy barely moved, didn't even lift his jacket collar or try to shield himself. The bus showed up just then, its headlights cutting through the gray evening. When the doors opened, I stepped on, and he followed behind me. Inside, the bus was mostly empty, and he sat down a few rows ahead. I glanced back and caught him staring out the window, blinking again. Rapid-fire blinks, then nothing. The ride felt longer than usual. The guy never looked at anyone else, didn't make any noise, just stared ahead. About halfway through the trip, the bus driver announced the next stop, which was mine. As I got ready to leave, I noticed the man from the stop wasn't getting off. I watched him out the window until the bus pulled away, then headed inside my apartment. That night, I kept thinking about him. The way his blinking didn't match anything human, the way he talked about waiting being peaceful, like it wasn't just a bus stop, but something else entirely. I didn't sleep well. The next day, I decided to go back to that bus stop around the same time, hoping to maybe see him again, or figure out what was up. But when I got there was no sign of him. No one else around either, just the usual city noise and the faint smell of rain on the pavement. I asked a woman nearby if she'd seen anyone strange at the stop lately. She looked at me like I was crazy. "No, just the regular people. Sometimes a homeless guy, but no one like you're describing." I left feeling unsettled, like something about the whole thing wasn't right. A week later, I spotted a similar-looking man at a different bus stop downtown, but this time I didn't say anything. I just watched. The blinking pattern was exactly the same. I don't know who he was or what he wanted. The whole thing still feels like a glitch in reality. Something off just beneath the surface that I can't quite grasp. I don't take the bus much anymore. I was on the downtown subway around 6 p.m., the usual rush hour crush. The train was packed, people squished against each other, a mix of tired faces and earbuds blaring. I had just gotten off work at a graphic design studio nearby, and I was looking forward to going home and not thinking about anything for a while. I found a spot near the door, standing with my back against the pole, holding my backpack strapped tight. The car was noisy, a jumble of conversations, the screech of the rails, and the usual blare of announcements. People pushed past each other to get off at the next stop. But then I noticed him. He was sitting by the window, just across from me, maybe late 30s, neat brown hair, glasses that reflected the flickering subway lights. His clothes were clean, but unremarkable. A gray jacket, blue jeans, nothing flashy. What caught me off guard was his smile. He was smiling. But it wasn't the kind of smile that reaches your eyes or fades when you look away. It was a fixed, calm, empty smile, like someone had painted it on and forgot to take it off. Even as the car rattled and people jostled him, even as a kid yelled across the car and a woman shouted at her phone, the smile stayed the same. I glanced around to see if anyone else noticed, but everyone else looked tired or annoyed, scrolling through their phones or staring blankly. Only this man had that unsettling smile. I tried to shake it off, assuming I was just tired and imagining things. The train stopped at the next station, and a wave of people pushed past him, bumping into his shoulder. He didn't flinch, didn't adjust his posture, didn't change the smile. If anything, it seemed wider, though it didn't reach his eyes. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but I told myself to calm down. People smile weirdly sometimes, right? Maybe he was just nervous or had some condition. I kept watching him, though. The more I looked, the more I realized he wasn't just smiling. His whole face was still. No blinking, no shifting expression, nothing. When the train rocked or someone shouted, his lips stayed curved exactly the same. His eyes calm but distant, like he was watching something I couldn't see. After a few stops, the car got more crowded, and a guy near me started laughing loudly, slapping his knee. The man didn't react at all, not even a twitch. Then I noticed something else. The lights in the car flickered briefly, just for a second, but when they came back on, the man's smile seemed sharper somehow. Like the edges of his lips were just a little too defined, the skin around his mouth smoother than before. I blinked and looked away for a moment. When I looked back, everything looked normal again, but that smile stayed. I was starting to feel really uneasy. The train slowed as it approached another station. People pressed in to get out. The man stood up slowly, holding onto the pole. His smile never changed. But then, as he moved past me, I caught a glimpse of his eyes in the reflection of the window. They weren't human. Not in any way I could explain. They were too clear, too bright, almost glowing faintly blue, like glass. I jerked my head away, pretending to look at my phone, but my heart was racing. Why didn't anyone else notice this? Why was he the only one with that smile and those eyes? He stood near the doors now, waiting for the train to stop. The car was packed tight, and people were pushing to get on and off. He didn't move like anyone else, almost like he was floating just a little above the ground. When the train stopped and the doors slid open, he didn't get off. The crowd surged, and I lost sight of him for a moment. Then I spotted him standing near the middle of the car, still smiling, still calm and empty. The doors closed, and the train pulled away. I wanted to get off at the next stop, but I was too shaken to move. After that, I kept catching glimpses of him on the train over the next few days. Always the same time, the same car, same spot near the window. Always that unnerving smile, never breaking, no matter what happened around him. One day, I tried to say something. "Hey," I said quietly as he sat there, headphones on, but not really listening. "Do you take this train every day?" He turned to look at me, and the smile widened just a little. "I try to," he said softly, voice calm and even. "But I don't always make it." "What do you mean?" I asked. He looked out the window like he was watching something far away. "Sometimes I get off, sometimes I don't." His eyes were still that strange, bright blue. It was like looking at a mirror that didn't quite reflect me back. "Do you live around here?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. No. Then he smiled that same smile again, calm and empty, and turned away. The rest of the ride was quiet. After I got off that day, I walked faster than usual. The city felt colder, more distant. I couldn't get that smile out of my head, or those eyes that looked like they belonged to someone else, or something else. That night I checked the news. No reports of missing people, no strange sightings. Nothing. Just the usual stories about traffic and the weather. I kept riding the subway, though. I wanted to see if I could catch him again, to understand what was going on. But some days he wasn't there. Other days, the man with the smile would be there, sitting in the same spot, watching the world go by with that empty expression. One evening, I sat across from him, and the train went through a long tunnel. The lights flickered off for a few seconds. When they came back on, I swear his smile looked sharper again, like someone had painted it on with too much care. I looked into his eyes, and for a moment I felt dizzy, like I was falling backwards. But the train kept moving, and the people around me were still talking and laughing. When I reached my stop, I hurried off and didn't look back. A few weeks later, I decided to tell my friend Mark about it. He laughed and said I was overthinking things, probably just some guy with weird facial tics or anxiety. But I'm telling you, it wasn't like that. One day I saw the man get off the train at the last stop, near an old industrial area. He walked down a side street and disappeared between two warehouses. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed. The street was empty and silent, just the sound of my footsteps and distant traffic. I stopped at the corner where he vanished and looked around. Nothing. No sign of anyone else. The weird thing was, I felt like someone was watching me, not in a normal way, but like something was observing from just out of sight. I waited a while, but no one came. When I finally turned to leave, I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows. I thought maybe it was a cat or a stray dog, but when I looked again, there was nothing. After that, I stopped following him. But the feeling stayed. The feeling that there was something not quite right about that man. That smile, those eyes. Sometimes when I'm on the subway late at night, I see people staring at me or the lights flicker just before someone steps on or off the train. But the man with the smile, I haven't seen him in a while. I don't know who he was or what he wanted. Maybe he was just someone lost in the city. Maybe something else. All I know is that his smile never changed. Not once. I'm Wes Harper, born and raised out near Amarillo, Texas. I've been flying crop dusters for a good decade now, mostly out here over the Panhandle. It's a job that keeps me high above the flatlands, watching fields stretch out like a green and gold quilt beneath me. Nothing fancy, just the usual work during planting and spraying seasons. That morning started like any other. I got up just before dawn, brewed a strong pot of coffee, grabbed my gear, and headed out to the airstrip on the edge of town. The sky was clear, the air crisp but warming quick under that early sun. I was scheduled to spray a patch of wheat near Canyon, about 20 miles southwest of Amarillo. Not a complicated job, but it requires focus, especially flying low and steady, no sudden moves. I climbed into the cockpit, checked the duster's instruments, and taxied out. The runway's pretty short, so you've got to be precise with your takeoff. That day, everything felt normal as I lifted off and leveled out around 100 feet above the fields. The radio crackled occasionally with updates from Amarillo approach, mostly routine stuff. Weather reports, no other traffic expected in my area, and reminders about altitude restrictions. I usually keep it on, but don't say much. Just acknowledge and keep my eyes on the ground. About 30 minutes into the run, I was making my third pass over the wheat when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A quick flash, a glint in the sunlight below me. At first, I figured maybe a bird or a shiny piece of farm equipment reflecting light, but then it happened again, closer this time. I glanced down and saw something moving at a speed that didn't make any sense. A silvery oval shape, sleek and smooth, darting beneath me low over the field. It was too fast to be a vehicle, too low to be a plane, and it didn't make any sound. I swear, it passed right under the duster's belly in less than a second. I instinctively tightened my grip on the controls, heart rate picking up. The shape wasn't huge, maybe 10 or 15 feet long, but it was so shiny it looked like polished metal. No wings, no propellers, no exhaust or engine noise, just a blur of bright silver moving so fast it made my head spin. I tried to call Amarillo Approach on the radio, my voice a little shaky. Amarillo Approach, this is Dust 47. Do you copy? I just had an object pass underneath me at low altitude, no idea what it was, requesting any traffic info. Static. Then the calm voice came back. Dust 47, we have no other aircraft in your area. No traffic reported near your altitude or coordinates. Repeat, no known aircraft. That didn't help calm me down. I circled around the field a couple more times, trying to see if it would come back or if I could catch another glimpse. But nothing. The sky stayed empty, except for the wispy clouds on the horizon. I felt this creeping kind of quiet after that, like the whole world slowed down and the usual sounds, the engine humming, the wind outside, just got distant. It was eerie. When I landed, I told the folks at the hangar what happened, but most just laughed it off, saying maybe I'd seen a trick of the light or some drone out of sight. I wasn't so sure. Over the next few days, I kept replaying it in my head. The way that thing moved, no plane I'd ever seen or heard of could pull off something like that at that speed and altitude. It didn't behave like any bird or kite either. At night, I kept waking up thinking about it. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a faint glow outside the window or hear a weird hum on the wind, but every time I looked, nothing was there. I flew again the following week, same route, same time, but the sky was empty and the fields just lay quiet under the Texas sun. I haven't seen that silvery shape again, and I don't know what it was or what it wanted. Still, every time I'm up there over those wide open plains, I keep an eye out for something that doesn't belong and wonder if I'm the only one who ever did. I pulled off Highway 67 onto the gravel shoulder by the little marathon station west of Brownwood because my rig was coughing and my phone said I had 3 bars and a job to call in. The neon over the pump hummed like a wasp and the night smelled like diesel and cut mesquite. I killed the engine, cracked the door for air, and then, because I always do, I checked my phone for messages. The screen read "No service" in big letters where the bars should have been. Name's Hank Lawson. I drive flatbed out of Abilene, and I was 2 runs into a 13-hour shift, tired enough to see mirages if the highway offered them. I shrugged it off and walked up to the pump. The card reader on the machine blinked. The numbers on the digital display were a little soft around the edges, like someone had smeared them with a greasy thumb. I thumbed at the keypad. "All right," I muttered, more to myself than to anything else. Behind the store, a dog started barking. Sharp, insistent. Then the barking stopped so fast it left everything in the air like a held note. The dog didn't pause. It cut off dead. You notice that. You notice sudden quiet in the country at night. The crickets down the embankment went mute too. The only thing left was the hum of the lights over the pumps and the distant thrum of tires on blacktop. I stood there with my hand on the pump handle and felt a small prickle run up my forearms. The glow over the parking lot changed. It wasn't brighter so much as whiter and softer, like the pale light you get inside a closed church when the sun hits a stained glass window just right. The whole sky above the station took on that white, the stars shrinking into pale pinpricks. No sound came with it. Air didn't shift. It just filled the lot. My phone didn't come back. The little clock in the corner of the screen still read 12:17. My wristwatch, old Timex, the thing that's been on my hand since before I had a mortgage, read 12:17 too. I told myself I'd been staring too long at displays and numbers. I sucked in a breath and tried to play it cool. I'd been out alone long enough to know when the road was trying to put something in your head. Then the truck behind me, a big double-axle dually, slowed to a stop on the other side of the pumps and idled. The driver's engine cut out and the cab went quiet. Somebody got out. I heard the thud of a boot and a curse. He called something, but it sounded like he was trying to talk through cotton. I called back, "You all right?" And my voice came out flat and small in the white light. He came around the back of the truck in a hurry, flashlight bobbing. "Phone's dead," he said, too bright-eyed. "Ain't nothing on the screen." He had that look people get when the world stops answering them, one of those looks I'll recognize later if you told me 10 years from now. We both stood in that white, and the pump's clock ticked like nothing had happened. The light hung there, like it had a shape we weren't seeing. My skin stayed the kind of cold you only get when you're trying to decide whether to keep moving. I tried the pump. The card reader flashed an error. The little LCD went blank for a breath and then spit back a number that didn't match the gallons I'd pumped. It said I'd filled the rig when I knew I hadn't pumped a drop. I stepped back. The pump clicked like a clock and then stopped. The other driver, a kid not yet 40, shook his head and said, "You see that too?" He sounded nervous the way men who grew up on ranches sound when they're about to confess they're scared. We both looked up at the sky and I wished for the stupidest things. Rain, a cop car rolling by, a radio that would come back to life with some AM DJ's voice. Instead, the glow stretched a little lower, like someone had lowered a lampshade. It shone through the rig's windshield with the same soft white that shows faces wrong and honest at the same time. My truck's telemetry screen, the one clipped under the dash that tells me RPM and temp and the like, blinked and then came back with nonsense numbers. The tack read 0 though, the keys were in my hand. The console clock flicked from 12:12:17 to 12:36 and then back to 12:18 like it wasn't sure what to do. It wasn't a dramatic effect. Nothing crashed, no buildings lit up, no thunder rolled. It was more like the world misplacing a page in a book and then finding it again. The dog barked a time or two, quieter now, then folded back to sleep. A tractor way off in a field coughed once and went still. That quiet became a pressure, sitting against my ears. We waited. The kid next to me started to joke about failing satellites and space junk because jokes are easier than other things, but his laugh sounded thin. I kept checking my phone and then my Timex, and both clocks held little differences like a lie. My phone stuck at 12:17, and the watch wavered into 12:36 for a breath, then snapped back like a rubber band. Finally, the glow thinned at the edges and pulled up and away like fog. The sky slid back to its regular black with its usual handful of stars. The neon over the pumps blinked like nothing had happened. My phone breathed life, and the network bars crawled back along the top of the screen. The kid's voice on the other side of the pump was sudden and bright. "Hey, did y'all just..." I checked the pump again. The total matched the gallons this time. The numbers lined up. The receipt printed, and I stuck it in my pocket, like paper that might be evidence. The kid walked to his rig, tested his radio, and then started up with a cough that made the dust dance. He waved at me, slow, the way people wave when the wind comes back. I got back into my truck and pulled the keys to my knee to start the engine. The dash clock read 12:38. My Timex read 12:17. My phone, blinking with 3 bars and messages stacking, showed a text timestamp from dispatch at 12:37 that I couldn't remember getting. My receipt said I'd filled at 12:18. I sat with my head between my hands for a long second. I don't chase ghosts. I don't write to papers or think in terms of things from a science fiction channel. I write logs and keep receipts and sleep when I can. But I also knew how long it took to drive the next stretch of highway empty and how long it took my rig to idle. 20 minutes is long enough to cross a county. It's long enough for a country boy to wake up to a calf being born. It's long enough for a person to get somewhere and be gone. I drove off feeling the rig heavier than usual, like the load inside had decided to take a nap. I called dispatch when I hit the blacktop. The operator's voice came through like it had always been there. "You good, Hank? You missed the check-in." I told her I'd been delayed at a pump. She asked for the receipt number, then said calmly, "You logged 20 minutes late on that last check, Hank. You sure you didn't stop somewhere else?" Her voice was flat, professional. I told her I was by the Brownwood pump. She put me on hold for a second and then came back. "No one else has reported outages." She didn't say it like it surprised her. By the time I pulled back onto the highway, the sky had the cold look of a bad night over West Texas, indifferent and clean. The Timex still ticked at 12:17 like a stubborn thing. My phone kept loading texts like it had been backed up with a tide. An hour later, my watch and my phone matched, and my dispatch log showed I'd been offline for 20 minutes. I could hand the receipt to anyone, and it would say one thing, and the clock on the dash would say another. My brain tried to file it away under tired, under static, under wiring in the marsh. It didn't want to pick any of them. I told my buddy at the yard the next day. He nodded and said, "That whole stretch has got weird power lines, don't it?" He laughed a little too loudly. I filed the conversation behind a handful of other strange runs I've had. Mirrors on the side of the road that didn't look like anything you'd see. A fog that smelled faintly of metal. I kept the receipt in my logbook, folded 3 times, and when I crossed that part of the highway, now I find myself scanning the sky before I stop, like I might catch the air before it rearranges itself again.